I'm not sure what happened, even though we knew this was going to happen, and I don't think that it's permanent, and I hope it's not permanent. But I had read that it was supposed to be chilly. I mean, like chilly, autumn. It is mid-October. It was 35 degrees when I got in my car like an hour ago.
Did you bring a hat?
I should have brought a hat. I mean, like, I've got a little bit of that, like, weird seasonal, like, change cold thing going on. And I'm like, holy cow.
And then it's going to be back in the 70s next week. So,
so it's just a disaster, right?
Yes, all the way around, especially if you're one of those people that your nose or your allergies or your head colds shift based on the temperature.
So here are the signs that autumn is upon us. The first is that it is now like gray outside and some of the leaves are starting to change colors, albeit a little bit later than usual. And the temperature now is in the like mid-40s. And then it gets, it's that time of year where the morning time, and then by the middle of the day, you're sweating and, whatever else. The other sign that it is autumn is the fact that here we have the National Football League in terms of looking at the postseason and looking at the schedule and the standings and trying to prognosticate where exactly, because before we know it, I mean, it's hard to believe that we're like a third of the way here. So before you know it, we're going to be legitimately talking about the Colts in terms of the, where they stand in the playoffs and whether or not they're going to be a wild card. I mean, right now, as it stands, they're there, right?
Yeah, they're the 7th seed. They're fighting between the Chargers and themselves for 6 and 7.
This is what it sounds like right now in the AFC in terms of the wild card chase. You're just stuck in traffic, right? You got people honking all around you. You got sirens going off. You're just sitting there absolutely in like rush hour traffic in New York City wondering what in the heck is going on, right?
So wait, you're telling me people don't actually do, hey, I'm walking here. Like, we didn't get that in that clip. Is that not a real thing? I'm very upset now.
This just simply says New York City traffic sounds that says for sleep. we need people. Here we go. New York traffic jam. Maybe this is better. Here we go.
Yes, there it is. You need a honk.
Yeah. There might be some profanity in this. I don't know. We probably should have checked, right? Just nothing but people honking. Do they still have cabs in New York? I don't know if they do. But that's literally right now. So you've got, whenever you get in a traffic jam, you're sitting there and there's always somebody like, what's this guy doing? What's this guy doing? What? Oh, wait, hold on. He's in the emergency lane, but he's merging over. He just moved like past 6 cars. That's the New York Jets. The New York Jets are making the move now where people are like, whoa, wait a minute. Should we have done that? Pittsburgh's sitting there, and they're saying, wait a minute, like Devontae Adams just signed with the Jets. I didn't think they could come to – and the Colts are sitting there, and they're like, it's okay. We just made a driver change. We just made a driver change, and we've got a guy that we think actually is going to move us a couple of lanes right now that's getting back into the driver's seat. He had taken a nap. We left him at a rest area. Now he's back. That's where we stand. But the Jets now getting Devontae Adams, and so does that mean that they are in play because of the fact that Aaron Rodgers now has a guy that he's friends with, and so he needs friends, and it's another weapon for them? Or are the Jets just cooked? And nobody here cares about the Jets, I realize, but it's one of those teams that the Colts are going to have to probably worry about in that if they want to stay in that playoff chase.
And they have to play later this season.
Now, I want to begin my first thought, though, from today with this, and I want you guys to tell me, and I have a feeling you're going to tell me that I am completely off my rocker.
Well, it's a Tuesday around here.
That's right. But I would like for the audience to let me know if I'm off my rocker with this statement. Okay? It sounds very knee-jerk. I've got a knee. Some say I'm a jerk. I don't think necessarily that the two of them, though, should go hand in hand and be knee-jerk. I don't like to think of myself as a knee-jerk guy. But this is maybe a knee-jerk comment.
Especially with these shifts in temperatures. You want to pull something.
That's right. That's exactly right. It is very easy in sports to take a small glimpse of something and automatically assume or label it within a large group as the totality. And sometimes you have to remind yourself not to get into that trap, if you will. But I'm curious of this. It is not a statement of all across the board fact, but I watched last night. I went to the Pacer game. We'll get into that. I watched them play the Memphis Grizzlies. I saw Zach Edey, and I got home. And I thought for sure the Monday Night Football game had to have been like late in the fourth. And I thought, oh, good, I've still got time to see the end of the game. I turned it on, and it was at the end of the third quarter. And I wondered, gosh, this seems like a slow-moving game, but yet there are quarterbacks that throw the ball a lot, so that has something to do with it, but yet there's a lot of ground attack going on here. So it probably balances out from the clock-moving standpoint. And I watched, and I tried to sit down and really watch the better part of the fourth quarter last night between the New York Jets and the Buffalo Bills. And literally, I kid you not, it felt like for 20 straight plays. I know it wasn't literally, but for what felt like that, every single play. Oh, wait a minute, there's a flag. Defensive encroachment. Line him in neutral zone. 55. Okay. Offensive pass interference. 82. Okay. Intentional grounding. Quarterback was okay. Roughing the passer. Every single play. And the amount of dead time and whistleblowing and reviews and looking at things and then review of review. And I thought to myself, I know that it's not fair to say this based on a small sample size. But more often than not now, more often than we saw before, and I know it's dumb of me probably to say on this radio station even, but I'm curious if anybody else thinks this. Is the NFL allowing itself more often than it should be to become a bad product? Is it becoming – Major League Baseball lost its way with a lot of its fan base over – not overnight, but over the course of 2.5 decades because the game became so slow. And in a world where people's lives became so fast and attention spans became so that of a gnat, they had to go, and Major League Baseball did a good job of saying, we got to speed this up. We got to go to pitch count. We got to do things to keep people invested, keep them involved, and move the game along so that and the NBA has done a good job with this. Soccer is the one that is the biggest beneficiary because when you ask young people what do they like about watching EPL soccer or whatever else, they're like, I know it's 2 hours. I know going into it that if the game starts at 7, it's going to be over at 9 o'clock. In the NFL, you're starting to get in like 3.5, 4-hour games and quarters that are taking an hour and 10 minutes with constant stoppage and exploration and analysis and review and whatever else. And I just wondered to myself, are they starting to play with – it's an 800-pound gorilla, but is it starting to go back down now to a 798-pound gorilla because of that? Did you guys watch last night?
So I watched the entire fourth quarter. I had my choice of
I went to the zoo. I don't know about you guys.
Oh, you did? You went to the little Zubu?
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. I saw a zebra show.
Really?
Yes.
Did you see the Frisbee dogs? Were they out last night?
The zebra show dominated for the better part of 9:30 to 11 o'clock where I was, yes.
Yeah, that's where I was. I'm surprised we didn't cross paths.
Disappointed. I thought you were actually promoting the Indianapolis Zoo for a second. I was really proud of you. Look, that's a bad game to use it as an example because it was near record-setting for the season. There were, I think, 22 total penalties called in that game for like 204 yards. I'm with you, Jake. It made that fourth quarter very sluggish. It made pace of play get lost in what was an otherwise pretty competitive second half. I know you can make the argument, well, if Aaron Rodgers doesn't hit that Hail Mary in the first half, then maybe that's not really a close game, but that's football sometimes. But you got no pace of play. You got a lot of wind taken out of the sails of what was a classic AFC East showdown between two premier, or at least one premier and one kind of fading star quarterback in the National Football League. So in the small sample size, yes, I felt like they got in their own way a lot with the flags. I didn't have an issue with the skybox review of the Aaron Rodgers fumble, but it was a snowball effect at that point of how many stoppages they had.
Even the commentators were saying, even Joe Buck was commenting it's just so. But it feels like more and more you see that with the NFL games. Maybe it's just me, but it just feels like in a world where most sports are attempting to make things more rapid, the NFL is falling victim to slowing everything down.
This is my Sunday viewing habits or weekend viewing habits of the NFL. I watch the whole Colts game. I will have Red Zone up on an iPad. Once the Colts are over, if the Chiefs are not playing, Red Zone goes up, so I'm not seeing drive to drive like that. If Kansas City is playing, I'll watch them, and then I'll watch the entirety of primetime games. So I'm probably watching 4 or 5 complete undivided attention games and then a bunch of Red Zone. So maybe I've missed it if you guys are watching like 6 or 7 full focus games. But from that viewership experience between the Colts and whoever they play, the Chiefs whoever they play, and the primetime games for the most part prior to last night, I have not seen a difference in the way the game is being in its own way because of penalties. But last night was terrible.
Jake, I've been saying this for the last few years. You can't celebrate a big play because you keep waiting for the whistle. All other sports are figuring out how to get quicker, and the NFL is slowing things down. It's still it's still the 800-pound gorilla. I get it. But I'm telling you, oftentimes empires begin to fall because they just assume that they are impervious to change.
And you're not wrong in that. I just feel like to that texter's point, I've heard people, I'm not saying you're doing this, Jake, but I've heard people do this because it's a valid concern you bring up. But I've heard people do this the last 5 years just for the sake of doing it. I know it's what was happening here, but I've heard it in bad faith about, the NFL's king. Maybe there's some cracks there. And I'm not saying the league doesn't have ways to adapt and get younger, but the penalties haven't been it for me necessarily. Except last night. That was atrocious. You can't have 2 football fields worth of penalties called over the course of a single game, especially that fourth quarter. So I don't know. I mean, from a logistics standpoint, a lot of the way the game has changed with RPOs and timing, you have ineligible men downfield more often. That has made a scenario where, if you want to speed the game up, do you just not call that? Do you let linemen block downfield for as long as they want? Sometimes it's illegal formation. But I don't think any of it, at least from my standpoint as a viewer, has been lost or felt like I'm having to pull teeth to watch NFL games. But again, maybe that's because part of my Sunday is Red Zone and I'm getting constant action injected in my veins.
Stephen Holder will join us at 1 o'clock today. We'll discuss what's been the latest this week for the Colts, including the news that Anthony Richardson presumably will return to the starting saddle coming up on Sunday. Scott Agness going to join us 2 o'clock. Pacers were in action last night in Memphis, against Memphis here at the Fieldhouse, and I was there. Let me tell you the couple of things that I noticed with that game. It is preseason, and the preseason does not, oftentimes indicate what you're going to see in the regular season, certainly from a personnel standpoint. And both teams, obviously, some of the mainline players were not there. It is amazing the number of Indiana connections on the Memphis Grizzlies roster. Zach Edey was kind of the big draw last night. And something happened that I was embarrassed because I thought to myself, I can't believe I didn't think about this or did not foresee this before it happened. When Zach Edey was running down the floor last night, at one point, I tried to envision. You guys ever, let me ask you this. Have you ever read a book, really enjoyed the book, and then they turn it into a movie and you're excited to go see the movie?
Yes.
And so you go to the movie, and when you were reading the book, you loved the book. And when you were reading the book, you had in your mind, you created what all of the characters looked like.
Sure.
What the house looks like where the movie takes place. What the city looks like where the movie takes place as it's been illustrated by the author. Then you go to the movie and you see it on the big screen. And you see actual actors and house and whatever else. And then it's almost difficult to remember how it was that you envisioned it before you saw it on the big screen.
Sure.
And if somebody said to you, explain what the house looked like and what the characters looked like and what the car looked like that he drove, and you're like, Gosh, I don't know, because it's almost been like Etch-a-Sketch cleared, and now all of the images I had of those people and are in my mind are what I saw on the screen. And I can't really remember how I'd envisioned it previously. It's difficult when I was watching last night Zach Edey play for the Memphis Grizzlies to remember what I had seen when he was first arriving in West Lafayette, because they literally are not even the same person. When he first got to Purdue, you could literally see the gears turning in his head of thinking through. Nothing was instinctive. Nothing. And everything that he was doing, he literally, it was like you could see that he was having to think through everything. And midway through the first quarter, at one point, I turned around and Matt Painter was walking down with his phone to like try to get pictures of Zach Edey, which was funny to me because I'm thinking Matt Painter probably could just say like, hey, you know, I coached that guy for like 4 years. And I'm looking at Matt Painter and I'm thinking to myself, how much credit does that guy get for this guy on the floor? And the answer is a lot. Because Matt Painter, and I saw Brendan Brantley down there last night, and Elliot Bloom, and that staff in West Lafayette that worked with Zach Edey. Sure, Zach Edey's a guy that had to put the work in, and he gets 90% of the credit. But you got to give credit to that Purdue staff for developing him the way that they did and making him see what kind of things he needed to do as a player. His footwork and his ability to get up and down the floor last night, he did not look like Mark Eaton. He did not look like, for that matter, you know, the later years Rick Smits. He didn't look like one of those guys that you're like, well, you know, like when people say, well, he's only out there because he's tall. No. The guy at UNC Asheville that was like 7'5" that made the tournament every year, that guy was out there because he was tall. But it took him literally, you could literally do drawing portraits of him walking up and down the floor because it took him forever to get up and down the floor. No fault of his. He was huge. Zach Edey was going up and down the floor, and I'm watching it last night, and I'm like, he might not be able to do this for 40 minutes in an NBA game. And yes, it was preseason, not regular season, but his ability to get up and down the floor, and people that question that, to me, I'm thinking to myself, this is not even the same guy that we saw in his early years at Purdue. He is a totally different athleticism and skill set and player. But the other thing that I noticed, and this is where I realized I was an idiot. I was an idiot, and I wasn't alone, because this was the most common talking point and concern about Zach Edey at the pro level. When we talked about Zach Edey and whether or not he could be a pro, the thing that everybody said, myself included probably, well, it's going to be hard for him because at his size, at the NBA level, nobody goes down on the block anymore, and you've got to get out and guard on the wing, and he just does not have the lateral quickness, and guys are going to go right around him. Boy, guys like the Kevin Durant's of the world, and guys like the Mobleys of the world, and the Christian Woods of the world, they're going to go right around him, and he's literally going to sit there and just spin around and look like a cartoon of the Tasmanian Devil. And then I watched last night, and Isaiah Jackson tried to do exactly that. Isaiah Jackson is a fleet-of-foot guy. He is a big that has the ability to go out kind of like a swing at times. And when Memphis had the ball, they go to Zach Edey, and he backs down Isaiah Jackson as if Isaiah Jackson's not even there, and then turns around on the block and does a drop step and hammers a two-handed slam that I think bounced off of Isaiah Jackson's forehead as it was coming through the net. I mean, it was with ferocity. So there we see what Edey can do on the offensive end. Then we go to the defensive end, and what do? But the Pacers get the ball in Isaiah Jackson's hand 17 feet out on the wing because they want to pull Edey away from the basket so that he is not there, because he completely was changing the Pacers' defensive or offensive mindset of getting to the basket. You could just tell guys were altering because they knew Edey was there in the middle. So they draw him out. And I'm thinking, well, this is where Isaiah Jackson is going to be able to go right around him. And I thought about when Michael Jordan was at North Carolina and was this superb athlete that was the National Player of the Year, because if anybody came out to guard him, he just would use one quick step, go right around, and go in and dunk or score on a layup for North Carolina. Until they played Indiana on March 22nd of 1984 in the Omni in Atlanta, Georgia, in the Southeast Regional semifinals, by the way. And they go against Indiana, and Bob Knight says, here's what we're going to do. We're not going to get out there and guard this guy. He doesn't have a reliable enough outside shot. Obviously, Jordan developed that as a pro. We're going to play 4 feet off of him and just force him to shoot. And he's not going to know what to do because he's always used that first step to get around people. Zach Edey last night when I watched him, the challenge of Zach Edey not having the lateral foot quickness to guard a wing 17 feet out is offset by the fact that he can play 4 feet off of them, probably more like 3 feet off of them, because of his wingspan. So he's standing from Isaiah Jackson far enough out that Isaiah Jackson can't make a move to go around him, but he still is impeding Isaiah Jackson's offensive ability to get off the shot because all he had to do was put his arm out, and he's still got a hand in his face. And I'm thinking to myself, how did nobody realize that this guy's wingspan would allow him to play outside of the low box and still be an effective wing defender without having to use the lateral quickness to compete with true lateral speed guys that are 6'9" when he's 7'4"? Because of his massive size, he was able to do both. He stood right there, and Jackson looked like, wait a minute, what do I do here? I can't if I try to put the ball on the floor and go around him, he's still 2.5 feet in front of me. And if I pull up right now, he takes one step out and he's right in my face, and his arm is right in my face as it is. And then if he drops down into the low block defensively, he completely negates the lane. I thought last night Zach Edey showed, Jimmy, that he may not be a 25 and 15 guy in the NBA, but he is going to be a very effective player in the NBA that, barring health, is going to be in the league for a very, very long time and have effect each time that he comes out on the floor.
Yeah, I mean, he had a great game last night. He was very efficient, and he's proved critics or skeptics wrong at each of the early steps of his NBA career that hasn't started yet because we're still in the preseason. But there were doubts about Summer League, and he performed really well there. There's been doubts in the preseason, and he performed really well there. And we're 7 days away from the start of the NBA season, at least opening night anyway. He is going to be the starting center for the Memphis Grizzlies. That's going to be an opportunity afforded to him. And because of those reps and his raw talent, he's going to have an opportunity to be a front runner like he is right now to win Rookie of the Year. I am curious to see, because it's a very small sample size right now, if the efficiency on both ends of the floor stays active as it is currently in these preseason and summer league settings.
Yeah,
if it is, it's going to be a steal for the Grizzlies. And a lot of us, myself included, will be wrong with what he can do in the NBA. I've always thought he could have a very long career. I thought it was largely as a role player off the bench. I never envisioned him being a perennial starter, and that's what he's going to be given the opportunity to do in Memphis.
And we'll have to see what he does once, obviously, you have John Morant and Jackson and those guys out on the floor. No question about it. When we come back, something happening with the Colts that I think is very interesting, and we'll see how it progresses. I will tell you exactly what that is because it's certainly worth something keeping your eye on for right now. Also, want to let you know that through the end of the year, anybody belonging to a monthly car wash program, if you got that sticker in your window right now or on your license plate that says that you do a monthly car wash program, then you can get $20 off a signature service oil change and free tire rotation at Jiffy Lube. That's right, $20 off your signature service oil change and a free tire rotation at Jiffy Lube. All you do when you go in is say to the Jiffy Lube team member, hey, look, I obviously care how my car looks on the outside, and clearly I care how it is running on the inside because that's why I'm at Jiffy Lube. And it's big savings. They will take everything from there. Big savings for your trusted one-stop shop for all your vehicle maintenance where you never need an appointment, talking about Jiffy Lube. The Colts and what we're keeping an eye on, something very interesting next. It does not take two at the quarterback position because the saying always is, of course, that if you have two quarterbacks, you have none. And the last thing that the Colts want is any sort of quarterback controversy. I'm not saying they would even have it, but certainly and I understand it, from a fan standpoint, from those of you listening to the show standpoint, from maybe even an outside Indianapolis perspective standpoint, the thought is, do they have two quarterbacks? I did a radio hit, as we call it, just like you hear on this radio station when we have on people from other markets. I did one last night in Kansas City, and first question they asked was, hey, is there a quarterback controversy there? There is not. And there's not, but yet there kind of is. And I'll let Shane Steichen kind of introduce us to what I'm talking about. This is Shane Steichen yesterday. Now, granted, this was actually recorded by a Secret Service recorder that we had. We sent somebody over to West 56th with a Campbell soup can and a string, and they were able to come up with this audio. But this is Shane Steichen yesterday talking about Anthony Richardson and Joe Flacco and the decision to go with Flacco in Tennessee on Sunday, but yet Richardson apparently going to be going against Miami coming up at Lucas Oil Stadium. Here is Shane Steichen.
Want to make sure he's 100%. That's really what went into the decision. He's really close. He's really close. That's why we had him as our third, emergency quarterback. But he should be, looking really good this week. Obviously, Flacco's a really good player, been playing good ball for us. But when Anthony's healthy, he's our quarterback.
Okay. When Anthony's healthy, he's our quarterback. Flacco's been playing good ball for us. We wanted to get him 100%. To me, that doesn't add up to me. I'm not saying they're lying. I don't think that. That would be irresponsible of me to say that. I get what they're doing, but you know what they're doing? They're letting Anthony Richardson ride around with training wheels. We wanted to get him 100%, and now we feel that, with an extra day of sleep, he's going to be, we gave him some NyQuil, and he got a good night's sleep, and so now he's 100%, so he's going to go. It's the National Football League. If you are trying to get a quarterback to play and be a regular quarterback in the National Football League, they have to get used to playing banged up, period. And the only way that they do is by taking the training wheels off and saying, we got to go through it. The thing that is the problem here, the area that is the one area that I understand we all need to be patient with, but they had to know going into it, is the one thing that kind of sucks is when you take a quarterback that doesn't have enough experience and doesn't have enough pure mechanics to be able to have them go out and learn how to play through pain, because you're worried that altering the way that they play because of said pain is only going to further throw off the mechanics, which aren't even where they need to be yet. And that the things that you're working on all of a sudden becomes erased because the player doesn't have the normal, actual discipline's the wrong word, the habits of footwork and mechanics to be an effective quarterback at the place they need to be in the National Football League. That's no fault of Anthony Richardson's. He's a young player that didn't play a lot in college. He didn't get a lot of snaps. But because there are things about him mechanically speaking that you need to make sure you are getting into the right habits of erasing and moving forward, like a Josh Allen had to when he was coming out of Wyoming and into Buffalo. But the problem with that is, the problem with going with that kind of basically a physical freak of nature experiment or project is that means everything has to be perfect in order to go out there and go from one game to the next. And you know what? In the National Football League, things are very seldomly perfect for a quarterback. That's the problem they're running into. And if they're just going to continue to say, unless he's 100%, then, Joe Flacco's a really good player. But when Anthony's healthy, he's our quarterback. Well, was he healthy yesterday? He was really close. He was really close to healthy, but he wasn't healthy. But after a good night's sleep and some chicken noodle soup, now he's healthy, so he's going to start for us on Sunday. If he was that close, and yet you didn't want to start him in Tennessee because he wasn't 100%, what that means to me is you didn't want to start him because you're worried that he was going to be playing in a compensatory fashion for his health or from aches and pains, and that was going to alter mechanics that you were trying to get in place for him. That's an issue. And I think personally, I don't know this. I do not know this. But as somebody who's covered this for a long time, more than one franchise, and college football, pro football, whatever it is, this is the first time that I have started to wonder if there aren't some eyebrow raising going on within the Colts as to whether or not they believe Richardson can be the guy long term. I'm not saying he's going to get 3 years. Don't get me wrong. But it makes me, for the first time, wonder if there aren't some people that are like, gosh, and if timelines aren't different and thought processes aren't different depending on who you ask. But to me, Jimmy, I am totally befuddled by, and I'm not trying to be some flame-throwing shock jock. I'm not. I don't want to be that guy. I'm a good guy. I'm a nice guy. But it just, to me, seems inconsistent. It just seems inconsistent, and an inconsistency with Anthony Richardson's been a theme all the way across the board.
I think it's inconsistent and weird with the way that they're addressing and handling things. I think that Shane Steichen, to his fault, is saying too much or being too vague in these press conferences, to the point that if you would just leave it at, we wanted him to have one more week under his belt to get the injury right, that it'd be more accepted. But it's this whole emphasis of, oh, he was so close. He was right there.
But how do they know, Jimmy, my thing is this. If they needed a week for him to get it right, how in the world do they know the next morning that he's now got it right when he hasn't even been on a practice field yet?
I'm not fighting you on that, because we talked about that yesterday. My point is that they're adding, whether it's a truth or a lie, either way, they're adding too much extra detail that the media and Colts fans don't need to know. A flat out, he wasn't ready to go. We determined that there's a risk for a re-injury by sending him out there, would have been sufficient for me. Where I have the issue is all these extra layers on top of it of, well, no, he had a great week of practice, but he was right there, but he was close. But now we're gonna just safeguard him a little bit. The other thing for me is the only thing I'm going to choose to believe with the Colts, and I'm not one to hand out passes to this organization. I've been calling for Chris Ballard's job for 2 years. The only thing that I'm willing to give a pass to, and we touched on this at the end of yesterday's show, they had to have thought, because one of the reports that came out was, I think it was lingering tightness, or it was like lingering pain that had popped up late in the week last week. They had to have thought from their in-house doctors and medical team that there was a risk, highly so, of re-injury for him that would cost him the season. Because, while I'm with you, Jake, nobody is 100% in the NFL. That's life. You need to learn how to adapt. If they rush him back a week early, and again, this is just speculation on my part, but when there's a chance of season-ending injury, let's just say, I get holding him out one more week, because if you lose him for the season, the year's over, and now you're really into injury-prone conversation. That's the only pass I'm willing to give, is that they saw something or they felt something in diagnosis that going out there when he did would have caused season-ending complications.
And I totally understand that, except for that, what was the magic wand that erased that concern in 12 hours? A good night's sleep?
I don't think it was a magic wand. I think it's that they're trying to put out a fire they feel exists within the fan base of, start Joe Flacco. He gives us the best chance to win. And they want to get out in front of that by saying,
fair.
No, Anthony Richardson's our guy. I don't think it's that he was magically cured.
But to
an
say...
extra week of healing?
What's that?
An extra week of healing and not going through the rigors of a game on Sunday?
But he went through... Then why didn't they do that last week?
Because he probably couldn't throw last week. In practice, he was barely throwing. If he can't push the ball down the field.
Who was Michael Pittman catching balls from?
Joe Flacco?
When he miraculously got better.
Well, Joe Flacco was throwing balls last week.
I'm not trying to give passes to the Colts. And Jake, I do largely agree with you on this. But the one thing that I think needs to be in consideration, and this is a one-off thing, if this continues throughout the rest of the season, like I said yesterday, you're coddling him at some point. But the one pass I'm willing to consider is they got a diagnosis in-house that if they put him out there in that situation, the risk of season-ending aggravation that causes the whole conversation of when is he healthy, when is he not,
I get it.
had to outweigh it. That's the only thing it could be, because if it's not, you're coddling him.
All I'm saying is this. All I'm saying is exactly that, to both your guys' points. And that is, do I think Anthony Richardson is going to be a quarterback here for a very long time? I do. And do I think that he has done everything in the right way? I mean, he seems like a really good guy. He's obviously uber athletic. He's got an unbelievable arm. We've seen the plays. But at some point, you have to take off the training wheels and you have to say, this is reality. And you've got to take off, literally, you've got to say, you know what? We're going to sink or swim with this. And this is either going to work or it isn't, but we don't know until we know. And I just feel like, quite frankly, they're doing him a disservice. but I'll tell you anyway. It was on this exact week, 42 years ago today, that this song was the number one song in the land. Jack and Diane from then John Cougar, now John Mellencamp. And I'm going to say this quietly because, I think people know. I mean, I'm like a Hoosier through and through, and, you cut me, I bleed the torch. I felt like that song, as wonderful as it is, as like the Indiana anthem, it kind of got to a point where it started to kind of jump the shark a little bit, and it was a little force-fed to us about how like it represents Indiana, and then it got fatigued, and now I think it's cool again.
I mean,
that makes sense?
I think that's the cyclical nature of songs that get associated with the state.
I mean,
right?
I kind of got to a point where I'm like, okay, I get it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I get it.
What land was it number one in?
All the land.
Where's that?
The
Or
land
what's
you
that?
sit on.
Okay.
By the
This
way,
land is my land. This land is your land.
by the way,
This land was made for you and me.
I
Yes,
did,
Jim?
I did some math based from NFL.com through 6 games.
That's scary.
8% of NFL plays have had penalties called. The average in the entire season the last 2 years has been about 7%. So a slight increase to this point in the season.
Well, here's
based
the thing.
on penalties per
that
play.
actually was at 3% until the fourth quarter of last night's game.
And then it just jumped.
in which they called it after every single play, and now it's at 8%.
Yeah.
239-1070 is the telephone number. That is the place where we find Jim, who has called in the program. Jim, how are you?
Hello.
Welcome to the company.
I'm good, Jack. How are you doing?
Good. Have you called the show before, Jim? You sound like a happy fella.
I have. I've called. I was the one who had the Emerson Fittipaldi racing story.
That's right. Okay, very well. And
Yeah,
Jim,
yeah.
you now what line of work are you in, Jim?
I do fiberglass and body work on RVs.
Okay, so you are actually the official body sculptor of the program. Is that okay?
I guess I can be the body sculptor. That works for me.
All right, what's on your mind, Jim?
Well, I got a theory and a thought on the sitting of Anthony Richardson that I really haven't heard discussed as much, and that is without Jonathan Taylor running the ball. I think if they would have played him, their thinking may have been that he is going to be more at risk by running the ball more than he probably should with the oblique injury, and that one was one reason why they decided to sit him.
Jim, here's the thing. Now, you say you do, tell me again, like carbon molding for RVs. Is that what you said?
I've done that before, but that's not what I'm currently doing now.
Okay, but like when you do that kind of thing, sometimes you've got like a big piece of fiber and you got to make sure that it perfectly fits on the bumper, right? Is that basically how that works?
That is accurate, yes.
Okay. Because I think in this case, your theory is a perfectly fitting piece of carbon fiber. I think that's actually I had heard that before. I don't know that we had ever echoed that or voiced it on this show. So I'm glad you called in, Jim, because I think that is a very plausible
I think they thought he may have been more at risk by trying to run the ball more without Taylor, and that's why they decided to.
Yeah, no, and I think that's very plausible, Jim. I appreciate it. I also think that the Taylor injury and team's ability to then load the box and bring the heat, if you will, against Richardson may also have been a factor if he was not at 100% of why it was not safe to bring him out just yet. But, again, I agree with that. If I'm playing devil's advocate, if this is high school drama class and you've got to play the other side I would play would be, but then they determined or said that he would be available this week if healthy before they even know the status of Jonathan Taylor.
I had brought up a variation of that last week because of all the injuries that were stacking up around Colts' key offensive players. Jonathan Taylor, Michael Pittman Jr., and Josh Downs were all on the injury report in some capacity last week. And there was a point by about Wednesday or Thursday where you thought none of those guys would go. And my argument was, if you take away those weapons for Anthony Richardson and he's not 100%, you are putting him in a situation where he's overcompensating, where he's pressing, and you're ultimately setting him up for failure in a start like that. Now, I eased some of that when Michael Pittman Jr. winds up going, when Josh Downs winds up going, to the point that, okay, he has a nice receiving core to throw to, but he still would have been without Jonathan Taylor, and we can talk all we want about the burst overall of Tyler Goodson or what looked like a positive day on the ground for the Colts. that's still not Jonathan Taylor back there. So I think the premise is still solid. My viewpoint last week was if you were going to take away all those weapons, I think you have a really hard look in the mirror about whether or not you play Anthony Richardson.
By the way, is there some – I don't know why I'm thinking this. Oh, Brad Miller, former Pacer Brad Miller. We've had him on the show.
Mm-hmm,
Do you know his hometown?
Somewhere in California?
No, his hometown in Indiana.
Oh, no, I do not know.
Edey, do you know his hometown?
I do not, Jake.
He's from Kendallville, Illinois. Indiana? Isn't Kendallville just north of Fort Wayne?
I'll take your word for it.
Our next caller probably knows. Kendall joins us on the show. Kendall, have you been to Kendallville, Indiana?
No, I have not.
Are you familiar with Kendallville, Indiana?
No, I'm from Greenwood, Indiana.
Are you really named Kendall? Kimball. Okay, my apologies. I saw it as Kendall in here. All right. So do you like Charlie Kimball? Is he your favorite Indy 500 driver?
I have a comment about a penalty that you just were talking about for the season.
Can we real quick though? So are you familiar with Charlie Kimball?
With the Colts.
Hey, Kimball, you there?
Yes.
Are you familiar with Charlie Kimball?
How's that?
What's that?
Hello?
This is going well. All right, well, never mind the questions, Kimball. Go ahead to your point about the Colts. Sorry.
At the
Never mind the questions, Kimball. Go ahead to your point. Okay, first turn down your radio, Kimball, and then go ahead with your comments about the Colts, if you will, on this well-oiled machine on this Tuesday.
the first penalty that was called last week in the Colts game against Downs.
Yep.
You remember what it was?
I do not remember what it was. Do you remember, Jimmy?
Oh, are you referring to the unsportsmanlike conduct penalty you got the other week?
Yes. How stupid. I've never seen that call. The guy does that what 500 other people do at the same time.
It's a good point you bring up, Kimmel, because they did not fine him the following week, which some beat writers basically adequated to the fact that it was them admitting they were incorrect, because what they were worried about was finger guns being on display around the National Football League, and that's been a point of emphasis. But you're right, Downs didn't do that. He just did the two-handed first down point, and it was misconstrued as finger guns.
Kimball, or let me ask you this, Kimball. Are you getting fatigued is probably the wrong word, but have you started to notice what seems to be a slowdown of the games by an excessive number of penalties being called?
Oh, yes, sir.
Does it?
Go ahead.
Does it? Aggravate is the wrong word, but does it feel like you're losing steam in watching a game?
Yes, because they make a good play on whoever team it is, and the next play you got to hold him, or two plays later you got to hold him. It just
you kind of feel like you're always waiting for the other shoe to fall, right? After any play, you're like, well, where's the flag? Now, furthermore, and I've been wanting to get to this for a while, Kimball, so thanks for your patience. Are you familiar with Indy 500 driver Charlie Kimball by chance?
No, sir.
If I told you there's a guy named Charlie Kimball that ran in the Indy 500, would you root for that guy if he got back in the Indy 500?
Yes.
Okay, good. It took a long time to get there, Kimball, and several flags, but I'm glad we finally established that.
All right.
I appreciate you calling in. That's Kimball, not Kendall, from Greenwood.
Kendallville, yes. It's north of Fort Wayne, east of Elkhart. It's closer to Elkhart than it is Fort Wayne, though.
But is it in Noble County?
Yes.
It is in Noble County?
Yes.
Okay. I knew there was a Kendallville. I just was doing it because it said on the screen that it was Kendall calling in. And so I was doing this fun segue and then all of a sudden, I don't know if you noticed this, but all hell broke loose.
Sometimes Kimball and Kendall can sound alike.
Well, in that case, so too does a lot of static for the first 45 seconds. Did you get a hold of Steven?
I did. I think he'll pick up the phone. We'll see.
You know, if he doesn't and he places you in a waiting period, you know what that means?
Yes.
It means you become the holder.
Yes.
Well, he joins us next. King?
It's not my favorite, but I've had it before. It's fine.
Did you happen to go into the bathroom when you were in Burger King?
Sure.
Anything going on in there? Eddie, did you say that we're having issues? We're sending out a carrier pigeon to Stephen Holder. Is that correct?
I have to reset the phone system, so yes.
You have to reset the phone system.
Oh man, this is the most technical that Eddie's job gets. I think I could confidently say that. Having to unplug wires and stuff. Man,
Eddie is literally
it's
right
like
now.
a real world Radio Shack
He is.
attendant.
You should see this. There's so many wires sitting between Eddie and myself. It's like, I mean, I can't even describe. It looks like in the movie Airplane when the guy pulls out the switchboard and turns off all the lights of the runway.
Half of those wires are just
Eddie's
there to
rebooting the phone. I have a question for you, Jimmy, in the meantime that I thought about on my way in, and I wanted to know your answer.
Don't shortchange me. It's the phone system, Jake. The entire system.
Okay, well.
Not just the phone.
It's the CIA over there.
Yes.
The number you have reached.
NSA, I guess it'd
3.
be better.
Are you getting that?
No. All circuits are busy now.
Okay. So are you sure that Steven hasn't blocked us? Also a possibility. Here's my questions for you, Jimmy, that I thought about on my way in. I want you to think for me of something that happened just without saying what it is. I want you to think of a pleasant memory in your lifetime from 10 or more years ago. Just something you did or something you enjoyed or something you had fun with.
So we're talking like 2014, give or take.
10 or more. It can be when you were 8 years old or when you were 15 years old, whatever.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. What did you just think of?
Seeing the Yankees win the World Series with my dad.
Okay. When you think of that memory,
Sure.
do you relive that memory in the first or third person?
Ooh. In the first person.
Okay.
But that's a good question. I've had that happen before where it's been the third
Right.
person, but that particular one, the first.
Do you remember when you graduated from high school?
Yes.
When you think about graduating from high school and you think about walking across the stage to accept your diploma, are you seeing the principal standing in front of you as you're walking, as you witnessed it in that moment? Or are you seeing it like from as if you're in the audience watching you graduate?
I think it's that perspective, but more higher up, like kind of like a sky
like
cam
a third,
type
like
view.
a third person view, right?
Yes, yeah.
Because I thought about that today.
What about you? Is it always one or the other for you, or is it pretty consistently third?
I think it's consistently third person.
Okay.
I think that's mostly because I don't want to miss out on the opportunity to observe myself, right?
You're not in a Burger King bathroom when you're taking that third person look,
that's right.
are you?
That's right. But I just wondered about that. I thought, I wonder if I'm alone here. Stephen Holder joins us now on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest line from ESPN.com and is assuming that we're going to ask immediately about Anthony Richardson. But
He's
rather,
gone.
we just
Oh, well.
did the phones crap out on us again?
I do not know.
Have you had any vocal contact with one Stephen Holder so far in this segment?
There was an attempted contact.
Okay.
Kind of like with Kimball there.
Do we have a
it
bullhorn?
seemed one way.
Can we get a bullhorn?
Have you thought about asking Steven about whether or not he roots for the namesake of an IndyCar driver?
That's right.
That guy was so confused. Poor Kimball.
I don't think Kimball could hear us.
No, I don't think he could. I think it was a connection problem.
Right. I know it sounds crazy to think that oftentimes some of my questions become lost upon people, right?
I think you brought this up earlier. I think the penalty thing, I haven't noticed it as much during Colts games. Am I wrong in that?
I think that's correct. But there are games where you see it and you're just like, what in
Last
the world?
night was 22 pennies is nuts. Like, admittedly,
and I
that's
mean,
crazy.
don't get me wrong. They're probably legitimate penalty, but it's just, I mean, after a while, it's, good Lord. All right. So do we have the hallelujah sounder by chance, Eddie? Just out of curiosity?
There it is.
The audience has been spared from the brain droppings. Stephen Holder joins us on the program, Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest line. Stephen, I'll begin by letting you. I don't want you to bypass or have to bypass
That's
on this
important.
brilliant conversation that I just brought up. When you think about Stephen, I don't know. I want you to remember for me, Stephen, if you could, the very first time that you were registering for classes at the University of Miami. I'm assuming that's a memory that you recall, right?
Yeah, somewhat. Yeah.
Okay. When you think of that, and you think about experiences that you've had in your past, and you go into your memory bank, do you see those things in the first person or third person?
I have no idea. Let's see. Let me think about this.
Okay. You and I went to.
How would you remember something in the third person?
Okay,
Like,
so here's the thing. When I say to you, hey, do you remember when you and I went to go see Too Short at the Vogue? When I say that to you, do you recall it in your brain, seeing the stage in front of you and what your eyes witnessed when we walked into the club, or do you actually remember it watching the two of us walking in as if you're like looking down on the?
I think probably first person for me.
Okay.
Just me personally, but I don't know if that's. I've never thought about.
Well,
this.
I see everything in the third
people
person, and I'm starting to think it's just because I don't want to bypass the opportunity to admire myself.
Have you thought you might also be all-seeing? Have you pondered that at all? I mean, just.
Well, I'm all-knowing. I know that much.
I knew you had that part down.
All right, Stephen.
Well, yeah, of course.
We'll transition to this. I want first just your reaction to the fact that Anthony Richardson on Sunday, or better yet, probably on early Saturday, was deemed not healthy enough to play. That's fine. But then somehow miraculously, like on Monday, it's like, nope, now we can definitively say he's going to be playing on Sunday, and he's our guy. What all went on there?
I think it's because he was that close, and it was one of those things where, if they had a worse quarterback situation, I think that Anthony Richardson would have played. Worse meaning your backup's not Joe Flacco. But they had the luxury of having Joe Flacco. Anthony Richardson was less than 100%, but super close, apparently, whatever percentage he was at. And the idea was, okay, he just needs one more week at this point, and we're going to give him one more shot to just get a little bit more healed, and then we're deciding that he's good enough. So I think what it says to me is that he was very close, and that they could have, in a different scenario, played him. But it was, as Shane Steichen said, I think I do take him at his word here. We want him to be completely healthy. This is the reality here is that Anthony Richardson has missed a lot of time in the lineup. So playing him at less than 100% or whatever the number is, when you don't have to, that maybe isn't the smartest thing. And I think I kind of understand that.
Name a quarterback in the NFL off the top of your head right now. Go. Not a Colt, just a quarterback. Go.
I don't know, Joe Burrow, because I just wrote his name for something.
What percentage of games that Joe Burrow goes out on the field is he 100%?
Well, yeah, that's why I actually think 100% is a misnomer here, because that's the word that Shane Steichen used. I don't think that anybody's 100%. That's true.
I mean, that's my thing is, like, at some point, if you are risking further injury, I get it. But at some point, don't you have to basically take off the training wheels and say, look, we've got to find out in what conditions this guy can play?
But I don't look at it that way. I don't think it's about training wheels. I look at it this way. I think this is all about perception, obviously, because that's all we have. But my perception is that this is not about that. This is more about Anthony Richardson told me, he said he's still having some discomfort. It's still healing as of Sunday. And so the question then becomes, how much does that discomfort restrict him? It's not about whether he can handle it. I don't think this is about toughness as much as, and I'm not saying you're questioning his toughness, you aren't, but I'm just kind of explaining it on my own terms. I don't think this is about his toughness per se. I just think this is about, okay, how much does this discomfort, this pain, affect his ability to function the way he needs to? So if it affects his throwing, for example, does it impact his ability to throw accurately? Does it impact his ability to run the ball if he has to scramble and get out of the pocket? The answers to all of those things might be yes. So I think the luxury here is, if we have any doubt about him being able to be his best self, then maybe the right move is to play Joe Flacco. I was surprised by it. I did think he was going to play, but I also can see both sides of it. So, look, I think he will play next week, and I do think that they've put it to rest. If they put him out there next week to start that game, they've put all this to rest. But Until that happens, there's going to be questions. That's fair.
Stephen Holder is our guest, covers the Colts for ESPN.com. He joined us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Stephen, what I'm choosing to tell myself, because it's the only rational move to not play him, because I get what you're saying about, well, they have Joe Flacco. That's a luxury they have. Well, he was the emergency starter. Like, it's not like they said, okay, he's right there, and if Flacco goes down, he's there. I don't think that should be used as an excuse. But that's not what I think happened. What I think happened, and I want you to rate me here if you think it's totally off base or if you think it's reasonable. The only reason to not play him would be they got something either in-house from what he was verbally telling them about how his pain tolerance was or how he was feeling, or their doctors had said, if you put him out here, there is a higher than normal chance of re-aggravation, re-injury, or something that could lead to season-ending or season-long complications. That would be, for me, the only reason not to play him last week. I'm not saying you've reported this, but that line of thinking by me, reasonable, insane, or are there more options for them as to what they could have done with the handling of Anthony Richardson last week? Because for me, that's it. Like, that's what it has to be, is he could have injured himself again and complicated the year.
It's not unreasonable. It's not insane, but I also don't think it's accurate. And here's why. Because my understanding of this injury is, and this is easy for me to say, my understanding of this injury is that it's not about it being worse or anything like that. It's more about how it impacts you when you play. I mean, think about it. You're talking about the oblique, which is, I guess, sort of that muscle right above the hip, sort of on the side. Mine's a little bit mushy. It's not, I don't have a six pack, but anyhow, it's one of those things where every movement you make, you're going to feel that, right? Depending on the severity of it. And my understanding is, I don't know that it was so much about injuring it further. I understand it to be a situation where it just has a big effect on your throwing motion, your ability to run, all of those things. To do all of those things at a high level, if it's painful, it's going to affect you. I mean, people who get to my age often have a bad back like I do. And I can do all the things I need to do. I can function, when I hurt it or when I sleep in the wrong position. But I feel it. And so I probably get around a little more gingerly. Or
do you think
I do.
Do you think Jonathan Taylor's availability impacted at all their decision?
I don't know that that's true. No, I actually think they're separate situations.
Okay.
I think it really is a situation unto itself. And one thing I would say, someone close to Richardson told me this, I'll share, that after speaking with one of the physicians and therapists that Anthony works with, someone not affiliated with the Colts, they consulted with that person as well, and they concurred with the Colts' advice here that to give it one more week. So I don't know that it was about getting hurt so much as it would have an impact on him on the field, and he couldn't maybe be his best self. So that's my best understanding of it.
Stephen, do you believe – Stephen Holder's our guest from ESPN.com. He's on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Do you believe that the Colts are as rock-solid convinced that Anthony Richardson is their long-term answer at quarterback as they were the week that they drafted him?
I mean, they weren't convinced when they drafted him, to be completely honest.
Yeah, okay, fair.
But yeah.
Have they seen anything that would give them, at this point, second guess?
No, here's why. No, I would say no, and here's why. Because for all of the conversation about this, all right, I'm going to do this without trying to be a jerk to Joe Flacco, but I'll just say this. If Anthony Richardson would have turned in the numbers that Joe Flacco did on Sunday, we would be acting like it was no big deal. We would say, whatever. So what? Big deal. Joe Flacco was patently mediocre on Sunday. Here is the thing. Anthony Richardson, take the numbers out of it. Numbers really don't freaking matter, to be completely honest. Here's the thing about Anthony Richardson. The offense right now, today, as we sit here, the offense has a higher ceiling with him in the game. I know not everybody agrees with that statement. I don't care. They're wrong. The offense has a higher ceiling with Anthony Richardson because he can make the big play. Now, I know we saw Joe Flacco do that against Jacksonville. Everybody's doing that against Jacksonville. They are awful. They're the worst team. They're the worst defense in the NFL. They're worse than the Colts. So what I'm saying to you is against a more formidable defense, Joe Flacco was not able to do that. In fact, he, for most of that day, really he wasn't throwing the ball past the first down marker in many cases. So their view of it, and I know Shane Steichen well enough to know this about him. Shane Steichen values explosive plays. You're going to get more of those with Anthony Richardson. Joe Flacco on Sunday, I think, was under 60% completion rate. So, I mean, his numbers were very Anthony-like, to be completely honest. So, to your original question, are they more convinced or less convinced? I don't know if they're more convinced, but they're not less convinced because they've seen enough from him that if he was able to play consistently, Anthony here, if Richardson was able to play consistently, which depends on his health, but if he's out there consistently and can build upon what he does, he's done enough good that there's a lot there to build on. The question is his health. That is, if there's any question, that is the question. And I think it will remain a question until he proves that he's not injury prone, and he hasn't done that yet.
Stephen, can you, for our listeners, kind of rehash the last week? Because I know it was your colleague, Adam Schefter, that kind of had the first report of Michael Pittman Jr. being a potential IR candidate. And then, that goes from that to, he's playing. Take us through, if you could, just kind of the timeline of events of how we went from A to B.
All right. So to recap, Adam Schefter did report, yes, that he was facing a back injury that could keep him out for multiple weeks, that injured reserve was being discussed. I will say this. I confirmed all of that myself with the organization, with someone very high in the organization. I got the exact same feedback that Adam got. So we were completely aligned there. And I know other reporters in town did the same. So the information was accurate at that time. In fact, it's actually been confirmed by Michael Pittman because after the fact on Sunday, he said, yeah, everything is still on the table. And the reason for that is because this is a recurring issue. Now, the missing piece is we don't know the exact nature of this injury other than it's a serious back injury. I don't know what that specifically means, and no one is giving us the details on that. So it's hard to judge that part of it. How much of a consequence could there be from him playing or what have you? I don't know. But my apparent takeaway from this is that he can't injure it further, but there's there's definitely a pain tolerance issue in it. And so he was initially, they were looking at all options, and that did include injury reserve, and Michael Pittman confirmed this. And so there came a time late in the week, Pittman, along with his father, Michael Pittman Sr., and other people in the picture, came to a collective decision that I'm going to try to gut this out. So that's where he's at now, and he's going to push through it as long as he can. He was very clear to say, look, I mean, this is week to week for him. Okay, so he's okay right now. Clearly, this thing has been going on, we think, since at least week 2, because he was on an injury report back then with a back injury, played through it, and certainly we didn't know the severity of it. And we can only presume that in week 5, I guess, 2 Sundays ago, something happened in that game to sort of make the injury more acute in the game in Jacksonville. Because after that game in the locker room, he did express some discomfort. Again, we didn't know what we didn't know at the time. So anyway, we're here now, and it's week to week with him, but he'll be out there. I imagine that he will have to miss a lot of practices as he, navigates this. But yeah, Michael Pittman is definitely among the tougher guys you'll find.
ESPN Stephen Holder with us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Stephen, going back to Anthony Richardson for a second, Jake and I had a conversation earlier about how the Colts could go from declaring him out on whatever Friday, whenever they officially made that decision and announcing it, obviously on Sunday that Flacco would start, to first thing Monday morning, the clarity of, no, he's going to be our starter unless there's a setback. I read that to an extent as to them wanting to not only reaffirm that he's good to go and they just were being precautionary, but also that they wanted to put to bed and kind of put out the fire, if there was one forming, about the idea of any quarterback controversy. Do you read into that as all as them being as blunt and straightforward as they were out of the gate? Because the counter side to that coin is, how could you possibly know he was healthy after 24 hours versus where he was being declared as unavailable on Sunday?
I mean, I don't know. I don't want to overthink it. I really think it was a situation where, yes, to a degree, I think there's some plausible part of this where they're like, all right, let's not let this become an issue. That doesn't mean that they hadn't decided, that they hadn't already decided.
Right.
The fact that they said it publicly is a little different for Shane Steichen, right? Because he doesn't reveal a lot generally, and he doesn't make a lot of declarative statements. So that was maybe a little out of character for him in a good way, right? We get more information. I always appreciate that. So that part definitely, I think, to your question, that's the part that's different. That's the part where he is, all right, look, let's just nip this in the bud. He's the quarterback. And he actually, before the question really was asked directly, he actually offered that up in talking about the quarterback situation. He knew the question was coming, okay? He knew that, but he kind of beat us to it. So I give him credit for that. So, look, he's anticipating the question, and they maybe could have done a better job in previous weeks of being clearer. So maybe there's a lesson learned there too. So yeah, I mean, I don't think there's anything necessarily nefarious about that, though. I think that's what you should do. You should be clear. You should not. If you don't think there's a debate internally, then you should make sure there's not a debate externally. So they did that, and I think that's the right move.
Stephen, does Jonathan Taylor play Sunday?
Oh man, I have retired from any Jonathan Taylor predictions because he's gotten me enough times now. Okay, I thought he was good 2 weeks ago when he told me he was 1,000% ready to go. He did not. He never even practiced that week. Then let's see, last Thursday, heading into the Titans game, he said that, well, I'm getting close. I feel a lot better. I'm going to go test it out, and we'll see if I can get out there and practice. He did not practice Thursday, nor did he practice on Friday, and he certainly did not play. So where does that leave us with Jonathan Taylor? It leaves us with Jonathan Taylor will let us know when he's ready, I guess. And who knows? Hopefully that's this week. But I will say this. I mean, they really need him. I talked about Flacco, being mediocre earlier. Well, in his defense, Jonathan Taylor not being out there was a problem. I mean, the running game was really, really tough sledding. And when you have Joe Flacco playing versus Anthony Richardson, who at least represents the threat of a run, it even makes it even worse. So they really do need something to kind of invigorate their run game. They took a big hit in letting Zach Moss walk. I'm not suggesting they should have, paid $5 million to a backup running back, but I did wonder whether they had adequate ability at the backup running back spot, just because Jonathan Taylor has missed a lot of time. And so here we are dealing with this ankle again, and we're seeing the results of the decisions they made at running back, which I thought, put them in a vulnerable position.
Stephen Holder, ESPN.com, and on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. And the next time we talk to Stephen, we will ask him in recalling this conversation if he does so in the first or third person. That is your homework assignment, Stephen. We'll talk to you next week. Appreciate the time as always.
I'll forget it all because I don't know what I did 5 minutes ago, but I'll try.
Welcome to the club, right? Stephen Holder joining us. All right, we're going to get back to what happened last night at Gainbridge Fieldhouse. We talked about Zach Edey, but also a couple of observations from the Pacers as well. And Scott Agness joins us to talk about that as well. Top of the hour here on a Tuesday edition, Query & Company. So, Edey, last night you were producing the Pacers radio network broadcast of the preseason home opener, if you will, against the Memphis Grizzlies.
As I do for the 82 regular season broadcast, yes, I was.
Was there anything in particular out of the Pacers that jumped out at you? Kind of difficult to tell in that circumstance, I realize.
It is difficult in that aspect, like you labeled there, just because, I mean, you're not playing Tyrese Halliburton, you're not playing T.J. McConnell, and then Obi Toppin only plays in the first half, Miles Turner only plays in the first half, but somebody who flashed in Cleveland flashed again for me last night, and that was Enrique Freeman. He just makes all the right hustle plays, and he's a guy that, you know, you have to create minutes for eventually whenever the coaching staff feels like he can play at the NBA level, because he's a guy that's going to go out there, he's going to rebound, and he's going to give you defensive effort, and that's what this team needs. Like, we know that they are a very, very good offensive team. If they can, you know, just be average defensively like they were the second half of the season last year, I think they were like 18th or something. If they can improve that and be in the top 15, there's no reason why they should be considered one of the best teams in the Eastern Conference.
The problem with the East is, at no fault of the Pacers, right? It's a logjam. I mean,
last night, Paul George hyperextended his knee, so he's probably going to be missing some time in Philly. Joel Embiid recently said that he's not playing any more back-to-backs.
I mean, Philly's the one that you feel like they're always going to have some sort of a bang-up, right? Because they have players with kind of that medical history. But, you know, Cleveland's going to be better. I do think Orlando's pretty good. Obviously, you know, Milwaukee is healthy again.
I mean, New York's going to
Boston.
be fun. Like, I don't know if it'll take a couple of games, couple weeks into the season to figure out what the Karl Anthony Towns and losing Dante DiVincenzo did to them, but like I don't expect them they stay healthy, to take a step back next year by any means.
Okay. Last night I developed a new favorite player in the NBA.
From that matchup or across the board?
From that matchup.
Okay.
I have no idea if this guy is going to make the roster. I have no idea what his contractual status is. I was relatively unfamiliar with him last night. I'm looking at the sheet.
I think I know who you're going with here.
I'm looking at the roster as I'm sitting down in my seat, and I say, well, this is interesting. This guy, I've never seen this before. This guy's 6'8" and weighs 159 pounds. Like, can we get a milkshake, please? And then he comes out on the court, and I realized that not only did they misspell his name on the pregame sheet, but they had his height listed incorrectly because he's not 6'8", he's 5'8". Okay?
I know who you're talking about.
And I don't want to disrespect him by mispronouncing his name. I believe I'm correct in saying it's Yuki Kawamura, right?
Kawamura.
Well, you both said the last name differently there.
Kawamura.
You said Murrah. He said
Or
Mira.
Murrah.
No, I'm for the sake of clarity, you both agreed
Understood.
but said different things.
I'm going. I mean, I don't know. I would assume because he's Japanese that is it Mura or Mura?
Well, you have
that it goes as?
Hachimura is
It's
the other
Murrah.
one. So
But either way,
just going off of like similar structure.
I
there.
have no idea
No clue.
what his odds are of making the Memphis roster. I don't know if he was a player that signed. I mean, I have no idea what his contractual status is. But he and everyone around me was saying the same thing. Everyone around me is like, this guy is exactly like T.J. McConnell. He had this incredible ability, and I've said this about T.J. McConnell, to understand angles. Like, he's not passing the ball where a guy is. He's passing it where the guy should be moving towards. And he just and he was incredibly fast. He was really fun to watch. And people on the floor just seemed better when he was out there. And then you got to root for the fact that the guy's 5'8" and 159. But I have no idea whether or not he will make their roster or not. But if he does, he's my new favorite player in the NBA.
I'm fascinated to see what Rick Carlisle does on Thursday in the preseason finale. Does he use that more of like a tune-up game for the regular season? Because
isn't that basically kind of what his comments alluded to today with the media / with Kevin and Andy? Basically that it's hard to play more than 9 or 10 guys on a regular basis during the regular season. And so from a clarity standpoint, I'm slightly paraphrasing here. It would be more like a regular season game rotation that he throws out there.
Yeah,
for the finale.
I think that what he said this morning was essentially that what he said was, look, I know that there are players that people are going to want to see a lot of, but it's hard to play 9 to 10 guys, and the preseason is that's where you work out as many of them as possible to find out who you have. The one guy that I really want to start seeing something out of, and it's unfair because I go back to where players are drafted and how they are acquired, whether you want to admit it or not, does factor into your expectation for them. It just does. You know, James Wiseman for the Pacers is seen as the found $10 bill in your pocket when he does something. But in Golden State, he was supposed to be a nonstop resource of $100 in your pocket because he was the number 2 overall pick in the draft. Different expectation based on where you're acquired. I know this player is young. I know that the opportunities haven't always been there for him because of log jams at position and talent. And I know that occasionally he does some things where you go, okay, he could shoot a little. Okay, he's got an ability to get a rebound here or there. And I'm not trying to be negative Nancy, and I know that people in the organization are very, very high on him. But I'm going to have to start seeing something from Jarris Walker at some point. Am I off base in saying that?
I mean, I just think you're slightly early because it was year 1 for him in the logjam you outlined. Like, I want to see something from him, but I'm not in the same boat as, say, Benedict Mathurin, where he's got to take a leap
but what I'm
defensively
saying is,
because it's only year 2 for him.
What I'm saying is, and I understand all that. I know he's a very young player. And you know, my buddy last night, Byron was saying to me, he's like, look, there are plenty of guys that they were in the league 3 or 4 years before they really blossomed, and you're like, okay, now I see it. I just think in the moments that he has gotten in, you know, there are guys that, as young players, they didn't get a lot of opportunity, or they get logjam behind players, but when their number is called, they show flashes where you go, yeah, you could see it was there. And I don't consistently with Jarris Walker, he doesn't do anything poorly, don't get me wrong. It's not like he's out there tripping over himself and giving up baskets, but he's just kind of there. And that's probably, somebody who has a more nuanced eye than myself is probably thinking to themselves, this guy has no idea what he's talking about, because there are areas he does show flashes. You know, he shows an outside touch from time to time. He'll make a nice pass. But you just think to yourself, when you're a lottery pick and you get, even if it's in spot situations, you should still at some point start to show, like, it should be pretty obvious when you're on the floor, like, yeah, that guy's the one that they see a ton of potential in.
I don't disagree with any of that. The reason I have pause with that conversation is what the Pacers chose to do with him last year, which is acknowledge the fact that as a rookie, with the position that they tried to play him at last year, there was a logjam. There was a logjam with bodies of Isaiah Jackson and Jalen Smith and Miles Turner and Pascal Siakam later in the season. So to me, and the fact that Edey, I believe I'm right in this, there's been talk of utilizing him more as a 3 this year, correct? Is that not been in the conversation?
So far he's been the backup 3.
Yeah,
so when the starters come off, he's the one replacing Aaron Nesmith.
So a small forward for those that, I don't want to get in the weeds of basketball lingo, even though I think that's kind of universal at this point, but small forward position versus power forward. I kind of hit the reset button for him, Jake, because in theory, that's a position with less logjam tendencies if that's where you're going to play him, and it gives you an opportunity to see a full half season to full season worth of him proving his mettle, where last year he just couldn't get on the floor. Now, you asked if I think you're being too harsh in your observation. Am I being too kind?
No, I think what they need to do, and this is probably what they're still in the process of doing, is finding out which it is. Is it A, that he is this position, or B, he is a Draymond Green Swiss Army knife position where we can utilize in different areas?
Sure.
And if that's the case, then I get it. But I just don't. To me, it doesn't seem like he has really exerted any one area where you go, yep, that's it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the role right there, because look at what he's doing. I'm not saying by any stretch of the imagination he's a bad player.
I just feel like I haven't seen him play. I feel like the same thing with Anthony Richardson. And it's not a health thing with him; it's a choice thing. They have had better bodies in front of him.
I know I watch more basketball than most. I kind of relate it to Jonathan Kuminga in the position that Golden State was in with him. He's a former lottery pick. They didn't play him much. And then last year, he just pops up out of nowhere.
Sure.
Like, he's uber athletic and he can defend. I think that's kind of where they're at right now with Terrence Walker. I mean, he's 21 years old.
Well, clearly they don't want to move him because they feel like
Bingo.
there is something there, right?
That's what Golden State refused to do with Kuminga.
And more opportunities arose for Kuminga last year, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
I mean, I realize he's young. Don't get me wrong. All I'm saying is, like, at some point, if he's going to have that Kuminga rise, at some point you got to start seeing hint of it, right? Scott Agness, by the way, joins us just over 20. Glory years, glory days, I guess, for right now, are in Bloomington when it comes to the football program. And obviously, big expectation this weekend with Nebraska coming in. And, I'm not going to rehash my 10-year discussion that I've had about how Nebraska football and Indiana basketball are eerily similar to one another. But Nebraska, I don't know if this is not obviously the Tommy Frazier Nebraska teams, but I think they're pretty good. And, they're also looking to kind of springboard into the right direction for the rest of their season, second half of their season, if you will. And
They popped for the first time in a minute offensively,
I mean,
especially with Dylan Raiola. I mean,
Yeah.
they're a fun team at times.
Hey, you got it right. Nice job, Jimmy.
I felt confident that time. Thank you, Edey. I didn't even ask you. How
so
about it?
they, it's a good matchup. And Indiana, a lot of buzz about it. Indiana's selling it out, and there's a lot of good stuff going on. And
You can get your photo that you always talk about when you have the Nebraska fans
aerial
in town.
photo. Ohio. It used to be Ohio State. The Ohio State game. Got to get the aerial photo of Memorial Stadium because it looks sold out. But now it really is, and a big part of that is because of Indiana. Curt Cignetti yesterday did an interview. Now, Edey, I'm just going to kind of paraphrase what the interview was, but you said the source of the interview, because we want to give credit, was Hoosier Connect. Is that right?
Yeah, Hoosiers Connect.
A video cast, if you will.
That's the NIL collective for IU athletics. So he sat down with, I don't know who the person is, but it was the Coach Sig podcast is what I think they called it.
So in it, and I know that a lot of people were understandably excited to see this, but let's go back to kind of this reality. Curt Cignetti now has been able to jumpstart essentially 3 programs in college football. And to his credit, when he came to Indiana, what was it he said? Google me. I just win. Google me. And he's done that. And he brought with him a mojo from James Madison. And I realized that at JMU, people are like, well, I mean, it's not like that's winning in the Big 12. It's not like it's winning in the Big 10 or the SEC. But it still was a matter of going into a program that was not necessarily used to winning and immediately getting them to the point where winning was expected and winning became something that they were accustomed to. And he did the same thing at Elon when he went there. They didn't have success right away, but then boom, once it found them, it was there. And now, obviously, in Indiana, his record is remarkable. I mean, 125-35. I don't care who you're playing.
Did you Google him?
I did Google him. And that, as a result, naturally, people in Indiana, or really at any school, but particularly a school like Indiana that has lost more football games than any in Division I and has not had a lot of success with coaches. I mean, Bill Mallory was a really good coach, and Sam Weich was there for a year. And, there are other coaches that had – Terry Hepner certainly seemed like the right guy. And other coaches, Kevin Wilson was okay. Other coaches have had tastes of it. But I think there's a lot of concern that Curt Cignetti now, because he's on the map and he's, he was doing game day when he was at JMU and he has this kind of infectious personality about him and confidence, that naturally a Florida or, an SEC school of some sort, I don't know who else beyond Florida is potentially going to be making a coaching change, but some school that would be willing to pay a $10 to $12 million a year would come after a Curt Cignetti. And Cignetti, in the interview that he did, said, look, and I'll give him credit because he mentioned names by name. I really like Scott Dolson. That's the athletic director. And he said, I like it here. I like it here. And he was pretty reaffirming that hey, and he said, as long as, and I'm paraphrasing.
His wife loves it here too.
As long as we can get the things that we need, to stay successful, we're going to be here. Now, I know that has Indiana fans relieved and feeling more comfortable. And I'm not saying he's going to leave. But you also have to take a couple of things into consideration here. Who's conducting the interview, Edey?
It was Hoosiers Connect. It was their podcast. I'm not sure who.
And they are affiliated with what?
The NIL collective.
So
IU Athletics.
That is the group that is helping bring in the money that helps then bring in money that helps recruit players, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So when talking to the organization that is responsible for the biggest support beam that you can ask for from a coaching standpoint, you want to make sure that you are letting the players know that are going to benefit from NIL and things like that, that's what – in other words, if there's one place where it's the most important to offer future solidarity, it's when you are doing an interview with somebody who is indirectly one that's helping you recruit players to your program. Secondly, and I'm just saying this all under the take it with a grain of salt caveat, but I go back to the famous quote of Nick Saban. I mean, Nick Saban is standing, I can still remember he was wearing like a kind of like a Panama Jack hat that was like a straw hat, like a straw cowboy hat, and he's in Miami, and he's saying, who in the world told you I'm going to Alabama? That is the biggest lie. I'm here to tell you right now, your reporting is wrong, and I have not talked to the University of Alabama. And like a week later, he's at the introductory press conference at Alabama. All I'm saying is, I hope and I believe that Curt Cignetti wants to beat Indiana, and I think he probably does want to beat Indiana. Until a Florida or somebody comes along and offers him, say, 10, 12, even $15 million a year, and then that conversation changes a little bit of, okay, and I think he was very calculated in what he was saying, and he's not a dumb guy. He was very calculated in what he was saying of the things of, so long as we have the things we need to be competitive here, so long as we have the continued support. And Indiana, I think, absolutely will for this guy. I think fans like him. We in the media like him. Players seemingly like him and respect him. There's not a single bad thing you can say about Curt Cignetti other than his record is such that it is going to increase the likelihood that somebody is going to try to lure him away from Indiana, and those things that, quote, are needed to be competitive and to show commitment are going to be actually a continued restructure of his contract. And Indiana has the pockets probably to do it, but I think it's entirely possible that they're going to be in a situation where they're going to have to show that they can.
There's two sides of this coin with his future. On the one hand, you look at where he's been. Most of the stops have been multi-year stops, especially since he's been a head coach. He had 2 seasons at Elon, 5 seasons at IUP, 4 seasons at James Madison, and now he's here. So on the one hand, you tell yourself, well, he likes to build things, doesn't usually jettison after 1 season, and that would give you context to think that maybe he does the same here. The flip side to that, and this is well cart before the horse, but since he had this discussion about his future, here we are. He's 63 years old. And this has been a trajectory for him of he's been at big schools on staff as a wide receivers coach or a quarterbacks coach or a tight ends coach, what have you. Last time he was in that role was Alabama in 2010, and then he's been on this coaching journey. Like I said, IUP, Elon, James Madison, and now Indiana. He's 63. Head coaching opportunities don't come around every day. Yeah, it's very fair to fear, if you're an IU fan, the idea of a Florida or whoever calling, because A, he ascends now to at this stage of comparison, bigger school, bigger program, where football was the all-encompassing object, and he does so at a time where he's getting full financial security. Maybe he already has that, I have no idea. But it's a fair conversation because of his age, and you look at the trajectory of a coaching pattern in today's college football landscape. Would it surprise me? No. If I'm running, Jake, you bring up Florida, and it's a perfect example because, in all likelihood, they're going to need to make a decision at some point here or there. If I'm Florida and I look at what Curt Cignetti's done in 1 year at Indiana, and I insert him into SEC country, why would I not think he could do the same thing there?
Correct.
That's the part that's fascinating in today's landscape of college athletics if he continues on the tear that he's on. And that would, for me, by the way, include beating Nebraska, and your only 2 losses on the schedule would be Ohio State and Michigan. And even then, I think they could beat Michigan. I that's at Memorial. They've looked really good at every expectation bar so far this year. There's no reason they couldn't beat the Wolverines. Ohio State, I'm not going to sit here today and say that I feel comfortable about that matchup, but the fact that we're even talking like that about the top of the Big Ten Conference and Indiana in that same conversation speaks to what he's been able to do already in 7 short weeks.
He signed, did Cignetti, a 6-year contract with a base value of $25.5 million for Indiana. Billy Napier, who's at Florida, his contract paid him $50 million guaranteed. So, I mean, that's simply my thing.
Yeah.
Listen.
It's not irrational. It's very real.
I think it's great. I mean, I think it's great that Indiana is in a position to have their coach being – and so far, everything he's done, merits the interest, the perceived interest that he's going to get.
Yeah.
And do I think that all I'm saying is this, do I think he wants to beat Indiana and loves Indiana? Absolutely. But I think he's going to get some offers that are going to make it tempting.
And I think he loves James
your
Madison.
point of his age is a really good point, though.
I think he loved James Madison. I don't doubt that he loved Elon, but you look at, again, his age and just the trajectory of a head coach.
The age is a real good point.
Like, and if I've never been in these shoes, right? But if I'm an athletic director and I look at Indiana and what it's been for the last 30 years and what he's done in 7 weeks and the season's not over yet, I have a hard time not throwing cash around there and just see what the story is.
Can you imagine $50 million?
No.
Like people are like, I feel bad for Billy Napier. Really? Okay. $50 million guaranteed? Yeah, I mean, nobody likes to lose, but.
And if you want to keep coaching, you'll probably won't be a head coach, you'll be a coordinator, but someone will give you a call.
Well, you could go to, I mean.
It's like Robert Saleh with the Jets. Like, he's going to be fine.
Right.
He got a nice
or you know,
contract
depending
still
on
being paid.
What your level of pride is, but my pride, you know, I mean, I got $50 million in the bank now. I'm feeling a lot better about myself. But you could always go back and coach at a UMass or UConn or something like that, right?
Or be a DC somewhere, or OC, whatever. Yeah.
Scott Agness joins us next. do that, I guess we'll use the breaking news sounder for this, Edey. This from the Bloomington Herald-Times, which is now posted on the Indianapolis Star. If you recall, and I remember at the time saying that we didn't know the specifics of this, I have certainly gotten, had more conversation about this and was very curious what direction this would head. We now know the name of not one, but two former Indiana basketball players who have made allegations against former Indiana team physician Dr. Brad Bomba Sr. Harris Miyazinovich and Charlie Miller both now have filed a federal class action lawsuit against Indiana University, alleging the university was, quote, routinely and repeatedly, that the players were, quote, routinely and repeatedly subject to, quote, medically unnecessarily invasive and sexually abusive rectal examinations by Dr. Brad Bomba. It is my understanding that this was essentially all of this. And again, I want to be very clear here. This is what I had talked about earlier when this story first broke. And all we knew at that time was there was a player who had made an allegation against Indiana, and the Indiana had hired an outside organization to investigate everything. And at that time, what I was saying was that Brad Bomba, it is apparently true that each player, when they would do preseason physical exams as an Indiana basketball player, that Dr. Bomba, who was the team physician and a graduate of, I believe, Indiana University's medical school in the late 50s, was the one conducting those exams, and he would do a rectal exam that typically men get after the age of 40 in particular. So medically speaking, they are not unprecedented exams. Do not get me wrong. It is not my place to opine whether or not that was right or wrong at that age, obviously, for a doctor to do so. But I think one could assume that perhaps that was a procedure that was more common as we advance along in medicine and learn more and more, maybe that at the age in which one would be a basketball player collegiately at Indiana University, that would not have been as normal a procedure. And then once Dr. Bomba retired and you had other doctors that came in to continue doing physical exams, those players who overlapped from those two administrations that were doing them, I think then thought to themselves, wait a minute, why are we not having to be subject to what the previous exams involved? And even though there was a lot of time that has passed, obviously those discussions came up of, hey, did you have this? Did you have that? And those players then felt a discomfort to the point of this allegation against Indiana University. I will say, for what it's worth, as somebody who attended Indiana, who knew people that were involved athletically at Indiana, I have never heard anything other than that Dr. Brad Bomba is a true gentleman and an excellent physician during the time that he was practicing medicine. I have no idea. I have never heard with this story. I don't think that anybody has made the allegation in any way that any of the what they perceive to be improper nature of the exams was in any sort of way for a sexual purpose in any aspect, but rather an unnecessary one, and therefore players have spoken up. This quote is in the complaint. Dr. Bomba Sr.'s routine sexual assaults were openly discussed by the Hoosier men's basketball players in the locker room in the presence of IU employees, it says, including assistant coaches, athletic trainers, and other Hoosier men's basketball staff, end quote. And so it also says in the complaint, Dr. Bomba Sr.'s routine sexual assaults were such common knowledge among the Hoosier team and its staff, both before and after Miyazinovich and Miller joined the team, The team and its staff referred to Dr. Bamba Sr. as Frankenstein due to the large size of his hands and fingers. My point being, at the time that report and those allegations came out, I remember wondering about if this was something that was going to go further or was an allegation that the university would look into, and that would be the end of it. That still may be the case, but the bottom line is now we know not one but two different players now whose names are publicly involved in a lawsuit, not an allegation now, but a class action lawsuit against Indiana University. So we shall see what comes of all of that. Scott Agness is going to join us just a couple of minutes. As a matter of fact, we have Scott now on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Last night, the Pacers and Memphis Grizzlies. Scott, one of the things that we talked about, not from the Pacers side, but rather from the Memphis side, I thought Zach Edey, in watching him, and I watched him pretty closely last night, I thought he showed a fluidity that many people probably were curious to see how he would be able to move at the NBA level. I thought he looked actually I thought Zach Edey looked like a guy that's going to be in the NBA for a long time, and when he's on the floor is going to be a guy that can alter the way teams go about things as opposed to just some guy that is, quote, out there because he's tall. You agree with that?
Yeah, good to be on with you, Jake. I totally agree. I thought while circumstances were a little different, right, and the fact that, John Morant, his top teammate, didn't even play last night, I couldn't help but think what that will look like. And then Desmond Bane, we all know what he can do, an Indiana guy as well. And I thought he just had an assertiveness talking about Zach Edey and just kind of continued to do what we have become accustomed to seeing here in Central Indiana. And I think, there were a great deal of questions about, how does his game translate? It's not a big man's game anymore. Then again, you consider the last few MVPs, Nikola Jokic right there, Joel Embiid, and back in the day, a guy like Giannis at 6'9" would be considered a big man. So I was very impressed with Zach Edey's contributions and how easily it came.
The other thing, too, to me, Scott, that jumped out at me about Edey, and I mentioned this earlier, but I want you to tell me if you agree or disagree. I think there was a lot of concern when Edey came into the league when he was coming out of college of, hey, true rooted big men like that struggle in the NBA because they don't have the lateral quickness to guard bigs, because now you get guys that are playing in centerless basketball, but 6'11", 7'1" guys that are taking the ball out on the wing and they're out 15 feet out and they can pull up and whatever else. And Edey can't get out and guard those guys. And one thing last night that to me was really interesting, he's guarding Isaiah Jackson, who's an athletic big, and Jackson's got him out on the wing to draw him away from the post defensively. And yet Edey was able to play far enough off of Jackson that Jackson's quickness was not a factor, but he is so big with so much length that he's able to extend his arm out and still basically keep a hand in Jackson's face while not surrendering the lateral, flexibility to have to then move on Jackson because he's playing far enough off of him. And so I realized at that point that playing away from the basket for Zach Edey defensively, I don't think is going to be the liability that people anticipated. Am I reading too much into that?
No, I don't think so at all. I think that's one of the biggest things we're going to be watching, along with how much faster the game is, and can you keep up with the pace, and what does that look like? But there was that instance. I specifically remember one on the right wing. Miles Turner, who we know is very good shooting from beyond the arc, tried to go on the dribble, and Edey stayed right there in front of him, and to the point where Turner gave up and passed out and moved on to the next option. So, no, I thought that was an astute observation about thus far what he's been able to show. We know what he can rebound. We know he can reach up and block several shots, but it's these other little things that may be a better tell of ways in which he can contribute and why he will be able to have, I think, health pending, obviously, a 10-plus year career in the NBA.
Scott Agness of Fieldhouse Files joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Scott, what have you made to this point of the preseason play of two players that have big expectations for them, especially leap forward years for them coming into 24-25 in Jarris Walker and Bennedict Mathurin?
Yeah, I would say there's been some bright points and then some concerning ones. Obviously, last night the thing was that got off to another poor start, which has been consistent here in the preseason. And overall, it feels like we haven't been able to glean very much as a whole, as a team maybe, from the roster in particular. But clearly, it's Walker and Mathurin really being challenged. Those guys played to the largest workload last night. Jarris almost playing 38 minutes in a game where most guys are, playing 18 to 20. And so they clearly have some objectives for both of those guys to accomplish. I thought Matherin was much better in the second half. In the first half, he looked kind of just disinterested, just kind of going through the motions. There was one sequence where he got screened and kind of made a half attempt at getting to his man, and the guy knocked down a three, and Carlisle called a timeout, and we could all see right away, that was clear as day, that what are you doing? You got to contest this. I don't care that it's preseason. It's instilling these habits and making these part of your every game routine, because you don't want to see those sequences of him taking him off defensively. We know what he can do offensively. I thought a couple times with those guys, the ball got stuck a little bit offensively, where they're just pounding away at it rather than moving it around, which is where this team is at its best. But I also recognize not only are those two put in new positions, but at that time they were playing with bench guys that may not even be on the court throughout the regular season.
Sticking with Jarris Walker, the thought is going into this season that you'll see him more as a small forward than you did last year as a power forward. There was clearly a logjam at the four for him a year ago. There would appear to be, at least in theory, if he is a permanent small forward off the bench, less of a battle for him to get minutes comparatively to where he was a year ago. Do you think that's the route they ultimately go with him, or do you think he winds up being interchangeably utilized as a small forward / power forward this season?
Yeah, I think the hope and desire of the team is for him to make it work at the 3 spot for a couple of reasons. Number one, obviously, is how the circumstances changed from a year ago. When he was drafted, remember, there was no power forward. It filled an obvious need. Then you add Toppin. Then last January, you add Siakam, and that finds Walker already out of the rotation, but without minutes in the foreseeable future. The other big thing, and I appreciate Rick Carlisle and others acknowledging this before the season, because you could see it last year, is they need more size. And Walker helps with that when you upgrade there by a couple inches out on the wing spot, potentially. That's the same thing even with James Wiseman. You go from Jalen Smith, who's 6'9", to Wiseman, who's your tallest big at 7 foot. I think upgrading the length and the size of the team is important without having to sacrifice, the speed and the playing style at which this team is trying to play. Now, will it be successful? There's a lot more I need to see from this, right? I mean, last night he did play a lot of minutes, 3 turnovers, though, throughout Summer League, which is a very different game. I get that. But turnovers were aplenty as he was kind of a point forward. But you got to recognize he's, 21? Now, for the 3rd straight year being asked to do a very different thing. And I think he'll benefit from it in the long term. It's just, where this Pacers team is headed and the talent they currently have. It's what's the patience level here that they're willing to stick with it, because it will likely have to take 3-4 months to establish and for him to get comfortable in this new spot.
Scott Agness is our guest on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line, Fieldhouse Files, where you can read his work. Scott, this morning Rick Carlisle was on the morning show with KB and Andy, and in talking about the upcoming season, Kevin Bowen asked the question about just zone defenses in the NBA, and Rick Carlisle essentially said, look, zones are a difficult thing to do because of the communication that takes place. Obviously, with Indiana, they're running a lot of different guys through. They're very deep. You don't always have the same 5 guys on the floor. They're used to playing with each other, even though they're all on the same team. Are we going to see, though, Indiana this year do some things or experiment with some things a little bit differently defensively?
I think so. To what extent, I think to be determined in terms of if it's not working, you're not going to be able to go to it constantly. But I think what the thought here is let's maximize this preseason window. And in doing so, especially because of our continuity, normally your focus is elsewhere. But because of how systematic and familiar so many of the guys are with each other, you're only really losing Jalen Smith from last year from a guy that was in the rotation, and he wasn't in the playoff rotation. I think it's a wrinkle that they want to have in their bag that the defensive co-coordinators, if you will, Jenny Busick and Jim Boylan, can go to, maybe depending on the matchup, or if something is just not clicking in the first quarter, let's change it up out of a timeout, go to it for 3 or 4 possessions, and I think that's probably more so the extent that you'll see it. But it is a significant shift. We have not seen this franchise play a lot of zone, even before Rick Carlisle. A lot of that was I had tons of conversations with longtime assistant Dan Burke about it in the past, and they just didn't believe a ton in it. And on top of it, to your question, Jake, is it takes a lot of time. It's not a simplistic thing because of what you're asking of the guys. And as the season goes along, there's very limited practice time, which doesn't afford you the opportunity to drill it in.
Be it in a good way or bad way, give me the player from last year to this year who will see the greatest alteration in their minutes played.
I thought you were going to say biggest leap or downfall. And to me, to that question, to me, it's easily Andrew Nembhard. Buy all the stock, I think, that you can right there. I think I'll go with the obvious thing here is probably Isaiah Jackson, because there's that need at center spot. And so ready or not, here I come is what I'm looking at as Isaiah Jackson. And James Wiseman's going to be right there and challenging him. And I think that's a good thing to have some competition at that spot in the backup center role. Outside of that, maybe an Obi Toppin if they elect to go small at times. I could see there being lineups where even, and we saw it in the postseason, where Siakam's getting a little bit at the 5 and even more at the 4. But I think he's been a guy like Andrew Nembhard that's really popped during this preseason. But to me, Jackson stands out. What about you, Jake?
Walker is one that you would say because eventually they're going to have to start getting him minutes, right? Jackson, although Jackson did without Jalen Smith there's going to be plenty of minutes for Jackson. But to your point, Wiseman is going to knock on that door a little bit. I could see actually the minutes of Obi Toppin sliding back a little bit. He was a really important player for them last year, and I think he's a really good player. But I also think, just like Rick Carlisle said, there's only so many spots and so many minutes to be had, right? Toppin is one that I could see his minutes going. I'm not saying out of rotation, but I don't know that he becomes as in rotation for the totality of the year like he was last year. Hope I'm wrong in that because I think he was really good for him last year.
Yeah, and maybe the other guy I would include in that bunch, and we'll see how the rotation shakes to start the season, because I think really Rick doesn't want to go past 10, as he's alluded to several times. But where is Ben Shepherd in all this, right? Because right now it's got to be, I think, with everybody being healthy, it's Mathurin at that 2 spot. But Shepherd was out of the rotation essentially until Mathurin went down with that injury, and they traded away Buddy Hield and became very valuable. He's a guy that's known for his defense, but it can also knock down the three-point shot, which the team as a whole, I think, needs to do a better job of. So I think in that case, it's going to be very difficult to not find minutes for Ben Shepherd. That's one thing I'll be watching.
On the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line, Scott Agness joins us of Fieldhouse Files. Scott, when you look around at the East, and there's been changes, most notably the Knicks, the acquisition of Karl Anthony Towns, and them jettisoning Dante DiVincenzo in the process, I hear Pacers fans discuss the idea of a step back for them this season, but not in the same way that probably you or I see it. A step back for some would be they've arrived now at the national stage. They should make the conference finals. For me, it's more a look at more micro level. They're only projected still to win like 47 games this year. I think they overachieve in that regard and take a step forward in the win column, but you know how the playoffs go. As you look around the East, the moves that were made this offseason, is there standing closer to middle of the pack where we might have seen them going into the playoffs last year, or is it closer to the team they finished out to be, which is the runner-up in the Eastern Conference?
Yeah, one thing I really like, as I mentioned earlier, was this continuity. I thought we saw that matter a great deal to start the 2013-14 season. If I remember right, it was something like they won 38 of their first 45 games. It went on a tear, and continuity played a huge factor there in a time when so many of these teams are changing things up. Now, Boston's a great example of continuity as well. But, right now, over-under is 47.5. Fans will remember they won 47 games last year. The goal was to get to the playoffs. They got to the conference finals. I absolutely see them in the playoffs. I definitely see them winning a series, but I do not have that expectation that they'll get right back to the conference finals. That is so difficult. And the fact that they were able to do it in back-to-back seasons there in 13-14 spoke to how good that team was and the accomplishments that they were able to have while challenging the Miami Heat at the time. But I think to me, this is about a 50-52 win team that's at minimum a second-round group that is still one player away or one player on the roster taking a giant leap from being a contending playoff team.
Scott Agness is our guest on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. All right, Scott, in terms of coverage for the year of the Pacers at Fieldhouse Files, let me know what you got planned because it is upon us now. What are we, a week away now?
Yeah, we really are. It's crazy to think things get started, and for the first time in several years on the road, where they go up to Detroit and such. Yeah, coverage. Right now I'm hammering out all kinds of stories. I was the only one out in Springfield and Connecticut for the Hall of Fame and all of that, and so I have several stories ranging from Debbie Antonelli to Herb Simon to Pat Knight and Coach Knight being honored out there at the Hall of Fame. So a lot of that stuff, as well as gearing up for the season. Still trying to shake out my access problems over there. But in the meantime, it's not going to keep me from producing content at Fieldhouse Files.
Well, if nothing else, you can come on and discuss with me, Zach Edey, because Josh She 13005421 on the X Post Twitter says this. Race man, you think Edey going to be good based on one NBA game? Wishful thinking. You should probably stick to commentating on boring racing that 95% of people could care less about. Now, I'm going to point out to him, the phrase is actually could not care less about, right? If you say they could care less, then that means, in fact, there are people that could care less than they do care, right? Yeah. So you got to get the phrasing right. But Edey's going to be a good player, right, Scott?
Yeah, forget the numbers. While those are spectacular, 23-9, again, it was the look, it was the attitude, it was the comfortability. We saw him get minutes against Miles Turner, too. So it was not just playing backups, an exhibition. You know, if in fact, he'll probably be even better when Ja's out there and they're at full strength because there's less of a focal point on him, and those guys not only will deliver passes to him inside, but he'll have that comfort with him. So, yeah, it's not the numbers you're paying attention to. At least I'm not. It's these eye tests, and from there you could just see he's prepared for this. And on top of that, all that experience at Purdue, Jake, obviously has him ahead of guys that are only 19, 20, just now coming into the league and still have many things to mature with what they're doing on and off the court.
Like I said, man, it's unbelievable to think about where he was when he first arrived in West Lafayette to where he is now. Kudos to Zach Edey, but also to the Purdue staff and everybody else for just the continuous work going into that. All right, Scott, appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon, all right?
Absolutely. Thank you, guys.
All right, Scott Agness on Fieldhouse Files. Also, while we were talking with Scott, yet another move. I believe this is verified in the National Football League, correct?
Indeed.
Amari Cooper, the wide receiver of the Cleveland Browns, is now on his way to the Buffalo Bills. Yeah, that's not a long drive to go from Buffalo to Cleveland. You think he just gets a Ryder truck and heads over?
Think they pay for the Uber? And it's worked out in the deal.
Wasn't it a guy for the Bills that had to do the Uber from Chicago? Do you remember that story?
Vaguely, yes. I believe
I don't remember what player it was,
yeah.
But there was a player that had been drafted by Buffalo, and he needed to go to training camp, and his flight got canceled, and he got hung up in Chicago, and so he got an Uber, took an Uber from Chicago to Buffalo, slept for the majority of it, but was awake long enough to find out that his Uber driver was an international student that was trying to pay off college. And so not only did he get the player to Buffalo in time for training camp, but he returned to find out that his student loans had been paid off.
Wow.
Also, by the way, once I was in Washington, D.C., that year that the Colts were absolutely terrible, the Peyton Manning injury, Curtis Painter year, there were two players. David Caldwell was one of them. He was a safety. And then they had a cornerback. I can't remember the corner's name. He was a 7th-round draft pick. Both had made the roster. I was in the Washington, D.C. airport coming back from an IndyCar race, I think in Baltimore, when the Colts had to report for training camp.
Now, are you observing that in first or third person?
Third. Thank you, Edey, actually, in third person now that I think back on this. But the Colts roster had been set, and then they were allowed to go home for like 3 days or whatever, and these two players, David Caldwell, and I can't remember the other player's name, Nick something, they went back to Washington, D.C. for the weekend, and our flight was canceled. Like it was like a 10 o'clock flight on Sunday night, and the Colts had a report at 11 o'clock in the morning. And we all went to the rental car facility to see, what was going on. The only rental car that they had was a smart car. And so these two guys, they're like, we have to get back. And so they rented a smart car and drove back. And then I ended up waiting until the flight in the morning. Saw them at practice like a week later, and they're like, that was the worst 11 hours of our life. Two NFL players packed into a smart car driving back from D.C. This is clearly their signature song, right?
Yes.
Are you a fan of Rush, either one of you guys?
That song, yeah.
I mean, I don't know who doesn't like Tom Sawyer.
Well, that song, but the band itself, like Dave First, IndyCar's Dave First, former WRTV sports director, like diehard fan of Rush. He's seen Rush in concert like 40 times or something.
It's kind of like Matt Taylor with Tom Petty.
Yeah, Petty, I feel like is a little bit more of a concert like event than Rush would be. I don't know. Is Rush Canadian? Is that right?
Yes.
Now, Jimmy, are you saying that because you know or because you want me to move along?
You probably looked it up.
I mean, I do have stuff up in front of me, and you asked a question, I had an answer, so I helped.
You have the Rush bio in front of you?
Formed in Toronto in 1968.
Wow, look at you.
You get an A.
That is impressive.
What I shoot for. For educating and entertaining, I want to make sure that
Speaking
we're
of
on
that,
the right area.
And then I promise we'll get back to sports, but I thought about this yesterday. Are you ready for this?
Sure.
Having nothing to do, and I'm being totally serious when I say this, I this is literally strictly an observation of, like, the radio industry.
Okay.
No one in the last 25 years, no one, probably has been a more influential or more impactful, powerful radio voice in this country than Rush Limbaugh was. But yet, when was the last time you heard anyone mention anything to do with Rush Limbaugh? I realize he's deceased. I mean, rest his soul. But I'm just saying, like, it's amazing to me how ubiquitous he was. And then once he passed, literally, it's like everything, I don't know, like I never hear reference to him. I never hear people reference comments that he made or visions that he had, anything. And yet he was a constant source of conversation in the United States for almost the totality of his career.
I mean, I would attribute part of that certainly to the way that, and I don't like us, this is weird for us to talk about this. It feels like it's only weird for us to talk about it because we still work in the profession, but I mean, you've seen where radio is at times with today's lexicon.
Sure, the expansion of the industry, yes.
Like Carson would never go away, Johnny Carson, for a lot of different reasons, but because it's a TV medium that is still flourishing,
yeah, I mean,
right?
I understand there are more platforms for which people to have themselves heard. I get it. But even with that, like, you just don't hear, I mean, I don't know, like, I just don't hear a lot of reference towards him.
I would agree. I haven't either.
Speaking of that, Johnny Carson, though, so Johnny Carson shows are still occasionally, I will watch them on some of the higher cable channels, like at night.
Sure.
And he was a master interviewer and quick-witted, and, everybody seemed to like him. I mean, he's very enjoyable even still to watch. But I will say one thing. Comedy is something to me that is fascinating because it just does not – half of the jokes he was doing and stuff you watch now is like you can – I mean, you hear it and you're like, it's the most obvious punchline ever, and 90% of it, I'm like, this just isn't funny. But in 1973 it was, or in 1982 it was. You know what I mean?
Right.
The envelope has been pushed so far, but so much of what he and Ed McMahon and the Amazing Karnak and the different skits they were doing, you watch it and you're just like, it just doesn't feel creative at all. By the way, Kevin Thomas is the defensive back out of USC that I think ended up getting traded to Philly, I think. But Kevin Thomas and I'm pretty sure it was David Caldwell, who was a safety out of William and Mary. And David Caldwell ended up starting, I think, the entire season. That was the year, it was right around that time that the Peyton Manning neck surgery came about. And then, of course, he ended up, and they went and got Kerry Collins. And after one game, figured out, like, this is not going to work. And I will forever believe that the Colts realized without Peyton Manning that they had no roster and no level of competitiveness, and I will forever believe that Bill Polian, the suck for luck was in early, and that they realized, you know what, we got no chance here, and so they went out basically and put together a roster that would go through the process that would allow them the best chance of getting the number 1 pick. And I know that sounds crazy, and it sounds like a disrespect to Bill Polian. It's not intended to at all. It actually, to some extent, was a very, very shrewd. If that is actually what happened, it's a very smart, calculated business move, to be honest with you. But I just remember that year, Polian was so defensive and steadfast about what their team was versus what they were putting out on the field that it was hard to not think this guy has to be posing, right? There's no way he thinks this team is actually that competitive, because they were nowhere within the zip code. And I mean, I remember at one point they were 0-8, and Curtis Painter, who's a really nice guy and a good dude, and was in an impossible situation, but Curtis Painter, they were getting absolutely blown off the field in games, and Polian was doing his radio show saying, well, I think if anything else, Curtis Painter has justified our selection of him and showed that we had a good vision. And it was almost so over the top, the other side, in terms of being defensive of it, that it felt like, okay, who are we fooling here? And then obviously they end up with Andrew Luck, and the assumption was this was a stroke of genius because you go from one franchise quarterback right into the next. And, we obviously know what happened there. But the second that there was a beam of light coming through the armor, Jim Irsay decided to – and I remember all of us being told that Jim Caldwell was being retained and that they were going to run it back. And I believe it was John Clayton, the late, great John Clayton, was doing a live shot live on ESPN talking about the retention of Jim Caldwell as the ticker on the bottom said, breaking news, Jim Caldwell's been fired. I mean, it was like that, whoa. And then they clean house, and the rest is history, and you go from there. But nonetheless, the big story now, obviously, with the Colts for this year is that of Anthony Richardson and the fact that it looks like he's going to go. The reality is, Jimmy, I wouldn't even blame the Colts in this. I know that we've been a little bit hard on kind of the weird nature of the Richardson decision to go, not go, whatever it might be against Tennessee. If they decided to hold him one more week because they feel like Miami, because of the uncertainty of Miami's quarterback play and where they are, doesn't it feel like this is a week where you kind of get a free spin week one more time?
I push the plausibility of that is not crazy, but I push back against that because the other side to it is it's an easier opponent in theory compared to what you have upcoming the rest of the way, or at least in this middle portion that I keep highlighting as a gauntlet: the Texans, the Vikings, the Bills, the Jets, who, by the way, even though it doesn't concern Anthony Richardson he's not defending these guys, but that's now in the last 24 hours, and not even that, in the last 8 hours, Devontae Adams to the Jets and Amari Cooper to the Bills. That's weapons added to two teams you're going to face in back-to-back weeks coming up. But it underlines the fact that for the Colts, the competition gets cranked up to 10 over the next 4 weeks after this matchup against Miami. The Dolphins are banking on Tyler Huntley with another week in Mike McDaniel's system.
That's Pro Bowl quarterback.
I apologize. I don't want to disrespect Snoop Huntley, Pro Bowler. I don't want to get any of that heat towards me. Okay, I apologize.
By the way, when did he become Snoop?
According to his bio, it's based to his college days. I don't know the full.
I don't know. Ask Coach Prime.
That's right.
So, Miami, yes, in theory, Jake, you could argue and say, well, it's a lesser opponent based on their overall threat with no quarterback. Maybe you hold him out another week. I would argue that I don't want his return to action being against the Texans, being against the Vikings, being against the Bills. I don't view it as a free space. I view it as another opportunity, another rep for him to get. And that's really, as you and I have been in alignment on all year, what this whole season is about from an organizational standpoint and from his development. Especially, that would be so against the grain of what they're telling us publicly. If I'm going to sit here and defend the idea of them being so quick to the punch about Anthony Richardson from Sunday to Monday, of no, he's ready to go, he's the starter, barring a setback, you can't then walk that back with the idea of, oh, well, it's the Dolphins, so we're going to hold him out another week. You don't have that luxury. You just don't when it's, Edey, what's the number? I know Kevin had this on 1075thefan.com. 4 starts in 25 games. Is that what it is? Something like that.
23 maybe.
23 games. You don't have that luxury.
23 potential starts, 4 in which he has finished.
You do not have that luxury to pick and choose when he comes back.
By the way, this is a good question that somebody just texted me. What does the crowd do in reaction if Richardson comes out and is not sharp from the get-go?
I don't care. Personally. I'm sorry to disrespect the fan base there, but it doesn't bother me, and it shouldn't bother the Colts.
It felt like there were more fans after the Tennessee game that were like understanding that it's still Richardson and not Flacco. Flacco was mediocre. It's not like Flacco had another 300-yard game.
I know, but but regardless of Flacco, I think that we have entered into an area where fans are wanting to start to see something out of Richardson in consistency.
And I respect that, and they're free to voice their opinion, but if you're the Colts, that shouldn't bother you in any way, shape, or form.
Well, I know, but I'm not asking what the Colts would think. I'm asking what will the fan reaction
there'll
be
probably
if
be
he
some
comes
boos.
out if he comes out and looks.
We've seen that throughout time in the NFL. Whenever you have a rookie quarterback or a veteran quarterback, we've seen both sides to that coin of frustration because they're stinking and you want the other guy that's shown competence. Yeah, they're probably going to boo.
What did the Chicago Bears, what did they do this weekend that stands out? The Chicago Bears did something this weekend. I'm 99.999% certain that I'm correct in this. The Bears did something this weekend in the NFL that nobody else did, and it's part of Jimmy's plays of the day, which we'll do next.
Today's Plays of the Day brought to you by Greenfield Signs and Lighting. Greenfield Signs, a professional, comprehensive sign company with 2 locations in central Indiana. They'll take your signage ideas and take hold of the project from design all the way to delivery. Family-owned and managed business for more than 4 generations. You don't often get a second chance to make a first impression. Make the most out of your first opportunity with the fine folks at Greenfield Signs and Lighting. For more information, go to greenfieldsigns.com. Today's Plays of the Day entirely focused on Game 2 of the American League Championship Series. Yankees lead that 1-0 over the Cleveland Guardians. Game 2 still in the Bronx. We will take over a page out of Edey's playbook, I should say. Over 1.5 hits plus runs plus RBI for Aaron Judge of the New York Yankees. We will also take over 17.5 outs recorded by Yankees ace Garrett Cole. Last one for you, give me over 7 total runs scored in this ballgame. Edey, any plays for you?
So you're banking on a big night from the Yanks?
I'm banking on a big night overall, but yes, I think the Yankees would carry that weight based on last night.
Well,
yes.
I'm not trying to play down your play here, but if you're going over 17.5 outs for Garrett Cole and the over in the game and a big night, wouldn't that mean you're going Garrett Cole's probably going under? If you're playing the over in the game.
Yeah, if I'm saying that it's
John, anything you want to add?
What are you nerds talking about?
By the way, the Chicago Bears.
I was also on Garrett Cole
John,
over
do you know this
17.5
answer?
outs for the
all right.
What?
I don't know why you did that.
Matsui.
This week that just ended
No
in the
plays for you?
NFL season, what were the Chicago Bears the only team to do in this past NFL week?
Win in London.
They were the only NFL team to win this week as the underdog.
Win in London.
I believe the favorite won every game but Chicago, correct?
No, the Colts
but
were
they
underdogs.
didn't win in London, though.
They did, John. You are correct in that regard. Yes.
Are you sure the Colts were an underdog?
Yes, they were. They were 2.5-point underdogs.
Yeah, that's where it closed.
Okay. Going into it last night, one of the broadcasters had said that the Jets, I think it was, were trying to become just the second underdog of the week to win. So they must have forgotten about the Colts because they mentioned the Bears.
What do you think?
John, I noticed you wearing on
Was it
the
home?
long underwear.
Was it home dogs?
Well,
Red
they
and
were in
black.
London, though.
Fair.
Chicago.
Fair.
R.I.P. Jim Gerard.
What's that?
Jim Gerard.
Jim
Hooks?
Gerard. Yeah,
Yeah.
Hooks Drugs, yeah.
Oh, I love Jim Gerard, man. I think his son is still around, is he not? Jim Gerard's son? Who's also named Jim Gerard,
I think that's
believe.
right. Jim Gerard Jr.?
Did you watch? There was nothing more calming. Now, it really didn't influence us as kids, but when the Jim Gerard show came on Channel 4 around noon, were you excited or disappointed when you heard this jazz music going in the background?
Disappointed because it usually meant that, like, the run of the kids stuff was over with, right? Cowboy Bob and Janie and all of it, right?
Oh, God,
Hooks
that was
awesome.
great.
Now, you know, do you ever go to the Hooks at the State Fair?
I did not.
They're still
Yeah,
there.
there still
There's
is,
an old-fashioned Hooks at the State Fair, which was awesome. Now, my Hooks was where I would buy baseball cards, and then I bought a pack of Kiss trading cards also.
What's your favorite drugstore that's no longer a drugstore, like Hooks, like Haig, like
Well,
Farmore?
I'm obligated to say Jordan Pharmacy because my dad worked there, but it was gone before I was around. My favorite, which you wouldn't remember, was Hammaker Pharmacy at 49th and Penn because
Just
I would go in there.
individually operated,
Totally.
independent
Totally.
place. Okay.
Loved it. I loved Hammaker.
We had one like Pielemeyer's in Bloomfield. Had a great nude magazine selection.
Really?
And they didn't cover it up with those, pieces of paper where you couldn't see the cover.
Did they have?
They just said, "Here's your cover, baby."
Was it near Sports
Here's
Illustrated so you
Adrian
could
Barbeau
slide
in
it
a rack
inside the
right there
Sports
for your
Illustrated and
little
make it look
10-year-old.
like?
I go, yeah.
Now,
All right.
when you said they had a great, are you talking just Playboy or like the good stuff?
No, well, I mean, they had Playboy, they had Penthouse, they did
We?
Oh, yeah. I used to call it OUI. We. What, Cherry? I'm pretty good at all these.
Do you notice
High Society?
Do you find it odd that when we were talking about point spreads, Jimmy and Edey were all over the place, but now that we're talking about We and High Society, they've gone
I'm going to get
completely
Jimmy
mute?
back in play here with the sports arousals with the Yankees or the Chiefs. Which gives you the most sports arousal? What the Yankees do or what the Chiefs do?
I mean, right now it's the Yankees because it's playoff baseball. It's hard to replicate that. I love playoff baseball. It's the best.
But Luke Weaver used to pitch for the Reds. I thought Luke Weaver was a piece of crap pitching for the Reds. There he's out there. He's out there looking like a pocket Mariano Rivera.
John, do you remember who did the Reds play in your first trip to Riverfront Stadium?
I want to say it may have been the Phillies back in 1976. I also saw them in 70. I thought I saw them in 78. I could have to look. I thought it was Tom Seaver when they traded for Tom Seaver versus Craig Swan, his old team, the Mets, and the Reds at Riverfront.
I'll tell you what. I mean, and I realize this is nothing more than literally kid nostalgia that makes me say this. I loved Riverfront Stadium.
Yeah, I did too.
Everything about it. I mean, just you go up the ramps, and then when you walk in, and on the left-hand side, they had, you could buy the plastic helmets out front. I mean, I had about 10 of those different batting helmets. I like how the batting helmets that you would buy had the little thing on the inside of the disclaimer saying, this is not an actual protective helmet.
Did you see that I found my Nasty Boys T-shirt?
I did
from
see that.
1990. And what's amazing about that, I went to Game 1 of the NLCS when they played the Pirates and lost. I sat in right field up in the last row, and I couldn't see. Carmelo Martinez was playing right for the Pirates. Paul O'Neill was playing right for the Reds. You couldn't see him during the plays. All of a sudden, they would emerge from behind the wall because the sight lines were so bad up there, but it was fun.
I mean, do you remember and I don't remember the exact, but your ticket stub was the color of whatever section you were in, right?
Yeah.
There was a yellow, red, and then the outfield was green, maybe?
You'd always stay across the river in Kentucky at that Holiday Inn that you could see.
Yeah.
I think that was Bill Cunningham's place for a long time over there, too.
I mean, it was, I don't know, there was just a magic about it. But all those stadiums, though, obviously, did you ever go to Three Rivers?
No, I've never. I've been to, obviously, Cincinnati.
Or the Vet? Did you go to the Vet?
I've never been there. Been to Wrigley. I've been to Dodger Stadium.
Busch?
I've been to a lot. I wouldn't go in that place. Not going anywhere in St. Louis.
That reminds you of we.
Huh?
No.
Well, every time I go over there, I say we because this Indiana State lose. And I think it's a loserville anyway, so hell, I don't want to go over there.
All those cookie cutters were the same, though. I mean, it literally had to have been the same.
So you're just talking about the cookie cutter multi.
I mean, it's so funny now when you look back at when they do, like you'll see old footage of an NFL game, the St. Louis Football Cardinals, and a guy's like, diving for a catch. It's like, man, he just cut his lip on the pitcher's mound trying to catch a pass from Neil Lomax,
Luke Weaver. I will say this. They came up, Cashman and Boone came up with some answers to questions that I thought they weren't going to find that answer to in a lot of places.
I thought they were going to stick stubbornly with Clay Holmes as their closer, and it wasn't working for him in high leverage, and they pivoted to Weaver late August, and
I'll give Stanton
he's been
credit.
insane.
He's out there limping around and just taking hacks and stuff. So, but
who are you rooting for? I mean, we know who Jimmy's rooting for. Eddie, who are you rooting for remaining of the remaining teams?
The Dodgers.
John?
I'd probably go with the Guardians.
I am too, just because they're the longest drought, right?
The Dodgers. I was over the Dodgers
though.
I like the Dodgers with Justin Turner. I don't like him without Justin Turner.
And
I was going for the Padres more than anything. And the Royals. Sorry, Jimmy, but
all right.
That whole Royals thing was.
If the Yankees weren't in it, I would have been pulling for the Royals and the Guardians, smaller market teams, and Cleveland 75 years. I
want to see Bobby Witt Jr. play so much better than he did in that series.
Yeah.
That was a downer.
So yesterday I mentioned to you guys I did a radio hit in Kansas City, and it was one of those kind of like a whip around thing like we do on this show every once in a while. And the guy that was going before me, so they call me and they, hey, you ready? I go, yeah. And they go, okay, we'll put you on hold. You're right after this guy. And the guy before me was a radio guy from New York, and they were talking about the ALCS.
Yeah.
And the guy from New York is saying to the guy in Kansas City, well, I mean, the bottom line is, and I know I don't need to tell Royals fans this because it's the Guardians, but, the Guardians are one of those franchises that nobody outside of Cleveland is rooting for the Guardians. I mean, everybody's rooting for the Yankees. And I'm like,
well, that's
I think it's
true.
totally the other way around, is it not?
No,
I mean,
it's not true.
I always think it's funny when you look at the Guardians, Ramirez is trying to, win a World Series. He's ended the Tigers. He's trying to end the Yankees. He ended the White Sox. He ended Tim Anderson. Look at all he's ended in his career. In the last 2 years, I mean, even without winning games, you look at that moment. Didn't the White Sox go down to the toilet that moment when he slugged Tim Anderson, when Tim Anderson came at him and he knocked him out?
You could put
right
that as a falling point, yeah, for sure.
That was basically it for him and Tim Anderson.
That call, incredible, by the way.
Yeah.
They're fighting!
Down goes Anderson!
Knocked out Tim Anderson and knocked out the White Sox.
Anderson.
The White Sox, I don't think are going to recover for a long time. The Reds, wire to wire, coming up in 2025 because I found that caricature Nasty Boy shirt in my closet.
You know what was 36 years ago today?
36 years ago today. What year was it 36 years ago today?
88.
Kurt Gibson's home run?
Bingo.
You know where I was watching that? I was in the lounge at Spaceport. In Bloomington.
Hell yeah.
I was in the lounge. I watched that at Spaceport.
I'll use a TV term. Do you know what the Chiron said right before the pitch? literally like the pitch before he hit it, the graphic that came up about Dennis Eckersley.
Was it like hasn't blown a game in 25
Has
years?
not given up a home run in 17 innings or whatever, and it's like, there's a drive to right. She is gone. All right, John, what's on the big program today?
Tucker Barnhart's going to talk some playoff baseball with us coming up at the 4 o'clock hour. Denary, I want to talk about this. I don't know if you guys noted that they're swallowing their whistles in the NBA, and I'm kind of curious how people are going to respond.
Because they gave them all to the
that.
NFL, right?
Yes. Now they're with the flags and the whistles. But we'll talk about that with Denary in the 5 o'clock hour. And then Rakestraw is going to be here. Final reg of the season of the high school football campaign coming up, I believe, on Friday night.
All right, John's up next. Yep. We will be back with you at noon tomorrow. Thank you for listening to Query Company.
I got to get my headphones.